Welcome to our first virtual discussion of expert. I refer to our experts as lived experience experts. You might also hear the term survivors, survivor leaders, things like that. My personal terminology for professional reasons and personal reasons is lived experience expert. So when I say that, that is what I am referring to is these amazing panelists. Probably see at the top of your screen, I'm not sure. We have a plethora of panelists with so many different experiences. We are trying to cover many bases. As we know, the issue of human trafficking is vast and very widely spread, and there are tons of different experiences, different terminologies, different references. And the reason that this panel even came about is because, as most of us probably know, we had some really prevalent stories coming out. Some might like to call them conspiracy theories. Some might like to say that, they're sensationalized. Some might say that they're factual. We don't have the ability to say what is or isn't when it comes to people's personal experiences. But the point of this panel is to bring a wide variety of personal lived experiences in all types of different forms of human trafficking, sexual exploitation, sex trafficking. Those are all the terms that you're going to hear me say. I personally use the term exploitation to cover a variety of experiences. So the point of this is to discuss a little bit about these theories that we've been hearing about, such as maybe Pizzagate or Wayfair or things like that, how those can be harmful to the lived experience community, as well as not only this focus is not specifically just on those things. This focus is to bring the experiences of the panelists that you've seen share their bios, to bring you a wider variety and understanding of the different ways that exploitation impacts our communities. And on a larger scale, when it comes to things like Pizzagate and Wayfair, I just want to put this out there that we cannot tackle those issues on a worldly scale until we tackle the issue of exploitation in our own homes and in our own communities and in our own districts. And so in order to attack this holistic worldly level, we have to first attack it home and sometimes internally, of how we are a driving factor in the issue of exploitation. And so I have been blessed with some amazing panelists to be able to bring their answers to some in-depth questions. And this is the real guys. Like, these are the faces of real people who have really experienced these things. And a disclaimer on that, we are not the representation of everyone. Everybody, despite that we have 10 great panelists, there are hundreds and thousands of other experiences that are very individualized. So I don't want anyone to take what we say and say, like, well, they said that's fact, so that's fact, and you're wrong about what your opinion is. This is just specifically our experiences that we would like to be able to share with you over these next couple of hours. So with that said, please do not, you can quote, but please do not take what is given to you through these questions and go to create an argument to tell somebody else that their experience is not valid, because that is inappropriate and exploitive in itself. And so we don't want that to happen either. I do ask that we honor everybody's experience, honor that these topics can be very triggering. Whether you think that the issue of human trafficking is not a personal issue to you, there are things that we might talk about that don't have to do with trafficking, but have to do with our vulnerabilities that led us to trafficking, that may trigger something in you that really hits you deep down inside. And so we want to offer and let you guys know, none of us are licensed therapists, but we are all and have all made ourselves available to talk after this event on a personal level. If you connect with one of us or what someone is saying, please reach out to us. And if we can't help support you through the traumas and triggers that happen, we probably know someone amongst us that we can refer you to help you out through that. And the point of this is not to trigger or traumatize anyone or bring up anything, but these are real things that are happening in our communities. And obviously you all want to be a part of the solution because you're here. And so we want to help guide you in the direction to be able to do so. So with that being said, We will be providing action items where a list of resources, a place, of great organizations you can get involved in. We'll be posting a few links to survivor lived experience led organizations that some of our panelists have, so that if you would like to donate, honestly, there's a lot of people enrolled in this. And so if everyone was to show up, even if everyone was to give like $1 for us to be able to put towards compensation for the panelists, we have been blessed by the New Jersey Coalition Against Trafficking. They have sponsored us to be able to pay our panelists for their time and expertise. But if anybody would like to donate towards the causes, we'll go ahead and give you that information at the end as well. I do want to ask the panelists if you can all take about 30 seconds to introduce yourselves. I'm going to just start with who is on my screen, and that is Wendy.
My name is Wendy Lizenko, and I am a lived experience expert survivor leader. I began the work working in this field of fighting human trafficking about 10 years ago. Started working with at-risk youth, and it just moved from there. Didn't even know that I had been victimized through exploitation and trafficking until I started working with vulnerable youth in the community. That was back when the issue of sex trafficking, human trafficking was like absolutely not talked about. In that 10 years, I've seen lots of things come and go, shift and develop, and I really feel like my intent in this is to reinforce appropriate awareness and kind of weed through some of the disinformation that's out there and really touch your hearts, because I really feel like when our hearts are engaged, when we can truly understand from a human level what effect this has on every different area that it has an effect on, that's when we start to see true change. And so that's my goal in this.
Eric?
Yeah, hi, my name is Eric Harris. I have a bachelor's in social work. I am also a lived experience expert consultant, and I'm also the co-chair and founder of IPAP's Lived Experience Expert Working Group in the state of Indiana.
Nick?
Hello, my name is Nicholas Alcadra. I am a lived experience survivor. I've been working in the movement for about a little over 8 years. I come from the LGBTQ plus community. And I have been doing direct services for the past 3 years and currently work as an outreach worker.
Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah Adeline. I am pretty new to all of this, but actually I only learned about being trafficked because I was in the middle of it when I actually met Jamie, and she helped me realize what I was going through and had been going through for many years. I became a YouTuber to be able to help other survivors that are kind of not able to see the more hidden aspects of the trafficking industry, as well as dealing with narcissists and predators. I speak mostly on the topics that are kind of hidden. They're less out there, they're unsuspecting. And so it makes it easier for addicts and predators to be able to latch on to these kinds of victims. I got into trafficking through modeling, and so that's what I will be talking about.
Adriana?
Hello, everybody. My name is Adriana Griffith. I am a lived experience expert, or formerly incarcerated survivor. I live in Stockton. I work for the Women's Center Youth and Family Services as a program specialist in our domestic violence and sexual assault program. So I'm providing direct services to victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking, and runaway and homeless youth as well. My goal here today is just to talk about the experience as somebody that's formerly incarcerated and a survivor of exploitation at the same time, so to shed light on that experience.
Penelope, you're next.
Hi, I'm Penelope. Jamie, you can call me Penny if you want. I am a lived experience expert, and I'm going to be speaking on how my experiences as a foster youth led to my exploitation, and how parents and social workers and foster parents can help prevent exploitation for their children and the youth that they work with.
Connie?
Hi, everyone. How are you doing? Take a really deep breath. There's going to be a lot of great information. So I'm Connie Rose. I am from Tampa, Florida. I am probably the oldest member of the Survivor Lived Experience, that group that's on here today. So thank you so much for having me. Like so many of us, I did not realize that I was a victim survivor of sex trafficking. And with that said, it took several years before that came to light. When it did, my voice became very robust and very loud. So from that, I am the founder of Victim to Survivors US, which is a survivor-led anti-sex trafficking organization. I have a consulting firm. I'm also the creator of the Collaboratory about eliminating human trafficking in your backyard. And recently, this is a huge win for our county. Recently have been appointed to our Hillsborough County Commission on Human Trafficking, and was able to have a survivor advisory committee so that we are the voice to actually lead this commission. So it's powerful. So again, thank you. Oh, I will be speaking on familia sex trafficking just a little bit later. So thank you so much for being here.
Summer?
Hello, my name is Summer Dickerson. I address myself as a survivor leader. I am the founder and executive director of a ministry in Kentucky called Women of the Well. We do housing for survivors. We do street outreach for survivors. We do education for our state. I went to the United Nations and spoke on my experience as a survivor of human trafficking. I also sit on the First Survivor Council. We help with legislation and all different aspects. We also go to court with our young ladies. I mean, you name it, we pretty much do it. It's an honor to be here today.
My name is Jamie Johnson. I am the CEO of Sisters of the Streets. For anyone who I don't know, again, thank you so much for being here, Sisters of the Streets. I describe it as an empowerment organization. We try to be gap fillers. There are a lot of great resources out there, but unfortunately, a lot of needs fall through the cracks when it comes to those of us who are currently being exploited, but especially for the population of people like the panelists you see who are out of this lifestyle and out of their exploitation for, say, 5 to 10 years, but still fall into hardships, dealing with the traumas and triggers and PTSD and results of the things that come from exploitation. So Sisters of the Streets tries to come in to basically just be put wherever we need. Like, we provide emergency and gap financial assistance for things that most organizations don't, like everything from dog food to daycare costs to rent to anything that will help prevent that regressive crisis of our mentality going back into like, okay, I'm back in survival mode. So we try to prevent that from happening, as well as I really identify with Summer's organization. I don't have a house yet, but we do a lot of street outreach, really like boots to the ground stuff, to where we can't expect people to come to us, right? Like, the church can't tell us like, hey, come to the church. We have to go out and we have to meet people where they're at and allow them their experience in their healing. And so Sisters of the Streets is really about self-sufficiency, self-empowerment, self-advocacy, and just helping guide that holistic approach to where we're identifying what the root similarities are, not only with those being exploited, but with those doing the exploiting as well. And when we identify that, we're able to see that we have a solution that can impact all parties involved, which ultimately that's how we create solutions for this issue of exploitation, which we'll get into a little more during the discussion. Adriana, first and foremost, can you tell me what is the difference between a straight out pimp or gorilla pimp versus a Romeo or boyfriend type of pimp?
So from my experience, a Romeo pimp, like for me particular, would be like the boyfriend. So they're going to be, it's the relationship, it's a boyfriend, girlfriend type of relationship. It's going to be, suave. He's going to be, a ladies' man or something like that. I want to say the gorilla, again, from my experience, can be violent, but I also think that there is certain situations where there's guerrilla pimping going on, but there is no violence. So particularly, I was quote unquote kidnapped during my exploitation, taken from Stockton to Sacramento, but it wasn't done very violently. It was a lot of intimidation, a lot of manipulation, but there was no like overt violence. And so that would still be considered like a guerrilla type of pimping. And so there's levels with each and every one. And I think one thing to remember with the boyfriend pimp or the Romeo is that there can still be levels of violence. All of these things can be happening simultaneously, one at a time, or all of the others. So it can be a combination of both as well. So for the Romeo, for the boyfriend, there could be elements of domestic violence in there, as well as the exploitation. So, but again, that's just my personal experience with that. But that is my understanding, is Romeo is the boyfriend, Gorilla is more of the violent and the kidnapping and the really heavily induced intimidation.
Right. And just to add on a little bit, because I believe our experiences are a little bit similar in some ways. The gorilla, so like a pimp, there's some straight out pimps where the relationship is a pimp and prostitute relationship from the get-go, but there's also that more coercive and sometimes not even knowing, like sometimes boyfriend-girlfriend relationships don't intend to start out as an exploitive relationship, right? Sometimes we fall into hard times, and this is not any type of justification, but sometimes, in underserved populations, especially in underserved communities, we have a boyfriend that we love, a girlfriend that we love, and then we see the media shows us so much of this, like, hey, stripping and webcamming and OnlyFans or fans only. I always get them confused. I don't know which one it is. So this is all put into our brains, right? And so when we're struggling trying to pay the rent or take care of our kids and things like that happen, sometimes the idea comes up of like, hey, like, you love me, I love you, like, let's go get this money. And that's how that transpires. It's not necessarily always a malicious intent, right?
Right. So like for me, my experience, my relationship with my ex-boyfriend didn't necessarily start off as exploitation. I had been involved in exploitation in the past when I already met him, but when I met him, it was not an exploitive relationship at all. We had gotten into a car accident like right after Christmas. Lost the car, and we were tired of walking, and we were just tired of walking around, really having a hard time finding a job. He was formerly incarcerated. He had just gotten out a few months prior to that, so having a really hard time finding a job. And so it was just more, like you said, hard times, not really having the options, especially in Stockton. There was a really lack of options, even more so 10 years ago. So it was a really, really rough time. And so we kind of I'd already done it before. And so we basically had that conversation. It was just like, oh, okay, let's go ahead and do that. And then it just snowballed. But the whole purpose was to get a car so we don't have to be walking, that we can be easier to go look for jobs elsewhere, whether it's in the Bay Area, Sacramento, whatever. But the whole purpose was to gain something that we didn't have before.
Right. And that oftentimes there's lack of resources for us to be able to obtain outside of things like exploitation, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that. And with that, do you have, I know you posted some great links for CSEC 101, 102, and 103 training. So please check those out. That's through Nola Brantley Speaks. She has some awesome trainings. She's another lived experience expert that offers this work. But with that, do you have some key points that you feel like any parents on here or teachers or anything that are involved in this discussion can kind of jot down to specifically identify within the youth that may be a boyfriend, girlfriend type of grooming situation or trafficking situation?
I think one of the first things, and just going back to what was going on with me at the time, was the domestic violence. And so it started with DV. And so any type of abuse, and it doesn't even have to be like the violence of the physical violence. It could be, the intimidation. It could be the manipulation. It can be obsession. So like for my case, I became very, very obsessed with my boyfriend, with everything that had anything concerning with him, as well as my, past exploiters as well. We had this very obsessive thought process when it came to them. So I think that, if your youth that you're working with, or a child or whomever, whether it be a child or an adult, if they're becoming very obsessive about their relationship, and they're talking about obtaining any type of wealth. So I'm trying to get a car, I'm trying to get this, I'm trying to, stack my money or whatever. I think those are all really like red flags right there. Also, what I wrote down some notes here. Also changing in demeanor. So if somebody's attitude is drastically changing, that could also be a sign that not only there might be some abuse going on, but that there also might be some grooming going on as well. So if somebody's not really obsessive about finances and things like that, and then all of a sudden they just start tripping and going, obsessing about making money and things like that, that's definitely something that you want to pay attention to. And then again, just being vulnerable, and I can't drive that enough, is that vulnerability is like the biggest risk factor. And it's so easy for any type of stream or exploiter to come in and manipulate that vulnerability in any capacity. And so vulnerability, just being vulnerable, is something to pay attention to, especially in our youth, especially now with social media, like Jamie said, with OnlyFans, whatever's going on. It's really, it's real out there. So paying attention to their vulnerabilities, and then paying attention to what they're listening to, what the messages they're receiving, the things that are coming out of their mouth, and just, like I said, demeanor and attitude.
Thank you. And I think you hit the nail on the head with we have to pay attention, like the signs and the blatant, it might not be so clear of what exactly is happening, but there's always a sign that something is happening. And maybe it hasn't transpired to the point where it has turned into full-blown exploitation or trafficking. And I use those terms interchangeably. I say or because I know some people don't hear the same kind of like heart grab when you hear the word exploitation. Sometimes, unfortunately, we have to say human trafficking instead, because that tugs on our heart a little more, but I use them interchangeably. And so I think that what you said is key, like paying attention, especially if we're working with youth or just within our own youth in our life, nieces, nephews, sons, daughters, friends, whatever the case is, right? Like if we pay attention, we'll see the signs that something is happening. So
I see a question in the chat box, and so just they're wanting to speak to a little bit of experience with. So she said that she works as a mental health counselor working with abused and neglected children and adults, seeing that some people who have experienced sexual abuse are made to believe that they wanted it and that they chose it and therefore think it's their own fault. Can you speak to this a little bit? Possible experience with feelings. And so that's such a great question. And I think that I have spoken to that before, not in this setting, but just in other settings where I very much, when it comes to exploitation and choice and coercion, I really think that there's such a fine line. And with my personal experience, I really felt like that I did, in a sense, choose it, but I felt like that my choice was tainted. And so I think that it's just really hard sometimes for somebody that's had this lived experience when they recognize the choices that they have made, but also recognizing that some of those choices were very much influenced by other factors. And so I think that it gets really difficult to separate the two sometimes. And I think that you get lost in your head a little bit, like, did I choose it? Did I not? Was I forced? Was I not? And so it can be really confusing. And I think that what's needed is just that support from mental health, whether it's peer counselors or clinicians, to just really be there and supporting anybody, going through that as they figure that out. Because I think that ultimately they really have to come to that at their own. Like, was that my choice, or really was that something that was really heavily influenced? And I think that we just have to figure that stuff out on our own. And so again, just standing there with a survivor, whether it's you're using a curriculum to kind of unpeel those layers and unpack all of that so they can understand and make those connections, or whether it's just through them experiencing life and just coming into that on their own time.
Thank you. Really great information. I'm going to move to the next panelist. We're going to do like 2 questions each for now, and then we'll come back to these. We do have a lot of conversation going on in the chat box. We cannot get to every single question, but there was one thing, some terminology. I do want to touch on terminology if people are confused on terminology. So I just want to touch really quick on what OnlyFans is. For anyone who doesn't know, so exploitation progresses, right? It progresses with the times, and right now our times are clearly virtual and interactive. And so prostitution and exploitation went into the web, the internet, years ago. I think when I was getting into it in 2009, I think like a year before that is kind of when it got real heavy into the internet. And so with that, it has even transpired more with this thing called OnlyFans. And basically what that is a private, you can charge for pictures from everything from regular photography pictures to fetish pictures like feet or underwear, or full-on like prostitution-based videos where you're doing full-on nudity, where you're doing sexual acts, whatever the case is. But basically it's a private avenue and platform where people can subscribe to pay you monthly or pay you per picture or per video, to where now prostitution has pretty much been able to go completely onto a platform like OnlyFans. And I don't have any direct or personal experience with OnlyFans, just of what I know with the women and men that I serve. But basically it's just another platform to gain money through more of like a sugar daddy type of sugar baby request type of platform. So another way for people to stream money through sexual acts and fetishes. And there was a question about male survivors. So I think, Eric, I'm going to come over to you if you're okay with that. The question was specific on how to get people to understand that males can be trafficked too. But I want to go into the questions that we discussed first. And so with that kind of interlinking, what is the most common misconception about trafficking amongst the male population?
I'd have to say for me, from my general understanding, especially doing my speaking engagements, is that a lot of people don't believe that it does happen to males. And my exploitation happened to me when I was a young teenager, you know, and at the end of the day, male exploitation is happening. I just feel that the culture that we've allowed in our society, which is, you know, the porn culture and also toxic masculinity, to where when a male does speak up, it's kind of shot down like, nah, that didn't happen. Nah, that's just bullshit, you know. But at the end of the day, we're still feeling the same exploitation as a female does. It's just, you know, there's a big power differential in the relationship that I had with not only my mother that groomed me, but my actual trafficker. You know, they played on my wants and needs and my vulnerabilities, you know, and at the end of the day, it happens. And it's sad to say that there's not a lot of services out there to help males with this, because at the end of the day, when we think about human trafficking, the first image that pops in our mind that's due to the media is people being tied up, or it's a woman or a teenage girl, you know. But at the end of the day, I first see it being the same way. It happens just as much as it does for males as it does with females.
Right. And thank you so much for pointing that out. And I can't stress that enough. And the only reason I believe, in my expertise, that the statistics show that it's like, I don't know, right now there's a statistic going around like 30% are male victims. I believe that if we did have a space to identify males as victims of exploitation, those stats would either be completely even, if not teetering on the side of males being more exploited. And so I am appreciative that you mentioned that, like, the societal drive of why males can't even come forward, not even to mention that if males do come forward, which goes into my next question, what service, I don't think I even worded it to you like this specifically, but like, even if a male is to come forward, what services are available for him to receive in his healing?
Well, I can only speak of my own experience as a teenager, because shortly after I was trafficked and I got away out of this situation, I got more into being a juvenile offender. And once I received that label of being a juvenile offender, it was really hard to look past the fact that I was a child acting out from trauma, you know, and I think that's a bigger issue too with society, is that we like to cookie cutter things. So, you know, we like to put everything in categories and stuff like that. But with trafficking, it's very unique. It's very personal. Each individual's needs are going to be different. Let's say your needs are going to be different than mine per se on that path to healing. But I know at the end of the day, after years of the system trying to put me up with like male service providers because I need to speak to a male about it. But honestly, my biggest breakthrough in receiving treatment and starting the path to healing was learning what unconditional love was from a feminist perspective. You know, because after being ingrained, after the system abused me, and then it followed me all the way up into adulthood, you know, being in foster care, I didn't have a transition plan out. And then what happened when I turned 18, I went back to my mother, and I just got back into the criminal element. And then that was just the fast track to prison. It just, you know, things just kept escalating. And that was more out of my personal need to build a persona to protect myself, because I felt so naive that I fell for my traffickers' tactics. You know, that was a really hard pill to swallow, the fact that I let someone have that much power over me, even at a young age, you know? So at the end of the day, until we can make it cohesive in our society that males can go ahead and feel their feelings and be vulnerable and cry without being ostracized or demasculated, that's the only way things are really going to change as far as the male's perspective. And again, I'm just speaking from my experience of trying to find my own path to healing, which took about 27 years, sadly enough. You know, it wasn't no overnight thing, and it's still a battle to this day. You know, just because we're out of the trauma, we somewhat got our life together, doesn't mean that those feelings don't follow us still, or certain dates or certain things, you know.
No, I think that that's a beautiful point, and I like to speak on that as well, as like, until we create that safe space within society, which we all, every single one of us on here has a part in that. When people say like, what can I do to be a part of the solution? Like, it starts way before providing resources. Like you said, it starts in our mental and moral state of like, how are we approaching this boys will be boys society? How are we allowing that demasculine approach to when men do show their emotions? How are we a part of that? Are we making small jokes of like, oh, well, he's, you know, we're making inappropriate jokes of like how their emotional state is affecting if their sexual orientation or their sexual preference or things like that. And so are we being a part of that within our own just circle of friends? Are we catching those jokes? It's kind of similar with racism, right? Like, are we catching those jokes when they're happening, and are we empowering change? Because that's where the solutions start. And then we can get to the point where we can start healing through housing and through all of these other things, job searching and things like that need to happen. But there's a step before that has to happen.
Well, not only that too, but my story, like, I didn't even identify as a survivor of human trafficking until I was into my adulthood, and I started connecting with other HT survivors or lived experience experts. And then finally, that's what opened the door, is like, holy shit, I'm not the only sorry about the language, but I'm not the only person that went through this. You know, it's just like we've already previously said, like, you know, did I allow this to happen? Did it really happen? You know, those were things that I battled with when I was deep in my addiction into methamphetamines and heroin and stuff like that. You know, and that's how I built that persona to protect myself. And at the end of the day, was it the best way? No. Is it sad that it took me till about age 36 to figure out? Yeah, but at least now I have a life that's worth living, and I'm making it my life. And it's due to about being a part of the survivor community, and not only that, but integrating, breaking the stereotype that it doesn't happen to males, because it does.
Right. And that kind of answered the question that I was going to ask anyways, which was, what are the top 3 things needed for men to be able to start their healing journey? And so I think you really touched on those, and I really appreciate you sharing your insight. And like I said, if we have time to get back to a couple of the other questions, we definitely will. So I know that some people have some specific questions on males. If you want to check out the questions in the chat while we're moving forward, if you feel like responding to any of those in the chat, that would be great. I think that might be how we could do this, panelists, is like, if while we're speaking, if questions pop up, maybe while the other panelists are talking, we can type in our responses in the chat, so that nobody feels like they're being overlooked or anything like that. So with that, I kind of want to go into, Nick, are you with us?
Yeah.
All right, awesome. I want to transition into the male aspect of the LGBTQ community and just that in general. And can you first tell me how the LGBTQ community is overlooked when it comes to trafficking, just in general?
Oh, it's overlooked because of like a lot of the faith-based have anti-gay dogma attached to them. And since there's been so much of like the faith-based involved in the movement, they've overlooked, like, I mean, I would probably say about 40% of the victims, because like the populace that I work with, because we go to basically every stroll around Chicago, from the south side, west side, north side, all around Chicago. And I've noticed that about half are either trans women or gay males.
Mm-hmm.
And noticing that, and then also too, the other problem that we have is like specifically to our trans community and our gay male community, when they want help to get out, yeah, we can find them places to detox.
Mm-hmm.
However, we can't find them places for like residential homes, because some of the residential homes have, because since there's been so much a shift, like they've done like a pyramid shift with the funding, and like how like organizations now can say, no, we won't serve trans. And now we have no services for trans in the city of Chicago. For like that kind of, for working with like their trauma therapy and like in a residential home setting.
Right. I've had that issue with trying to place a few of the women that have come to me for support, is because they weren't, they were pre-transition or pre-surgery. They could not go to the women's home, even though they identified as women, had for years. They couldn't afford the surgery. And so, they needed support and they needed help, and there was absolutely nowhere for them to go. And then they're back on the streets, oftentimes getting arrested and then being put into male prisons,
right.
Which is a whole nother issue in itself. And the risk factors and the violence in that in itself. And so there's these huge just issues, right? It's like, because, okay, people want help, but then if there's no services to be offered, if I don't even have a safe place to sleep, why would I not be exploiting myself to make sure I have a hotel room, or make sure that I have a car to sleep in at least at night? And so there's all of these dynamics, and my heart aches for the LGBTQ community, because there's already a lack of resources for cis straight women who are impacted by this issue. And so when we trickle down to the issue of males and trans and same-sex orientation, it's almost feels so overwhelming to the point where we're like, what do we even do? And so these conversations, as sometimes as repetitive as they can feel, especially for us as panelists and lived experience experts, they are so necessary. And I'm just thankful that this reminds me how necessary they are, because we do need to engage in seeing and hearing that from you, Nick, to know like there's no services. So what are we going to do?
And then, like, even within the LGBT community, they, like, okay, so they have a center, I won't be, like, mentioning the name, but they have no programs, but they're getting millions and millions of dollars, but they have no programs for people that have been involved in prostitution. And the same thing with LA, because I ran into this in LA, where I was like, well, why aren't you opening up programs? And, like, kind of like a back and forth thing that I went through out there. Because I care a lot about the trans community, because a lot of my friends coming up were trans.
And so with that, what do you feel like, for anybody who might be listening or might hear this in the future, when it comes to action items for those that have loved ones that are part of the LGBTQ community, what can they do to possibly prevent and instill in their loved ones from their loved one becoming susceptible to exploitation? Or more so, what did you need? What could have helped?
It would have, it would have helped me when I was 17 years old, that when my father found out that I was gay, him not saying, like, take your faggot ass to San Francisco, I hope you get AIDS and die. And, being put out at a younger age and then having to, like, survive on the streets. Embracing your child, supporting your child, learning to love your child, and also too, learning to ignore people like members in your own community who degrade you because you have a gay child. That's what my parents went through with me growing up, because I was a little more feminine. So they felt that it was okay to, like, beat the gay out.
So that acceptance, that genuine love, the unconditional love and support, and that family approach and dynamic of, like, and also I think it's important too, like, oftentimes, unfortunately, the community with LGBTQ, they are oftentimes disowned by their own family. And so I think us as members of the community learning to embrace people as our own family for the people that don't have family, who do get disowned by their loved ones, because blood we can't control, but we do get control who we allow into our spiritual family or our worldly family. And so I think part of another solution for us as community members can be to take it upon ourselves to embrace those that feel like they have absolutely nobody, and become their family. Because that, as Nick has shared, can make all the difference in going down a path of exploitation, which who knows where that has led his life to, and where his life could have gone, had he just had that embrace from somebody.
I would have ended up.
Speak for you. That's kind of my interpretation.
I would have ended up like a college graduate, in my 20s versus in my 30s and 40s.
But you're still a college graduate, and there's that. So,
But I mean,
hooray for that.
The other thing too, I think, is like, I know I might be jumping ahead with the healing, but like when you want to look at how to work with LGBT survivors or victims, you have to realize all the different, like, structural violence. Then you have, like, racial structure, all these different, like, areas that are, like, affecting the person. And so then peeling away, like, like when you work at healing somebody's trauma, it's like an onion. You're peeling, like, layer by layer by layer, and having to understand, like, all these different layers that this person is being affected by. And it's not just the prostitution. It could be things leading up to the prostitution.
Right, definitely. The layers are super important. And hopefully, we'll have time to get back to more of these questions a little bit later on, like the digging into some of that. So thank you so much, Nick, for sharing.
Yeah, thank you.
Genuine and raw, and I love you.
Love you too.
And with that, I think with you talking a little bit about systemic issues and the platforms that create those vulnerabilities, I'd like to go to Sam. Are you with us? Are we good on our mic?
Yeah, I think so.
Yay, I could hear you. With that, Sam is amazing in just the work she does when it comes to she does a lot, but I specifically really wanted her to speak on the systemic issues that really add to and push to the vulnerable populations. So, Sam, can you share with us just a little bit about your experience and the direct link with racism and human trafficking or exploitation?
Okay, I mean, we've had people already talk about, just foster care and not being recognized as a victim and not having services. And so when you look at victims of color, you have all of that compounded. And so with systemic racism in this country, when we look at Black children and Black women and Black LGBTQ brothers and sisters, we have this inability to see them as victims because of the biases that are intrinsic within the U.S. system. And so at a young age, it can happen in grade school, but at a minimum, it happens at that kind of grade school to middle school transition. We start seeing young Black children, we start adultifying them. And so we start seeing Black boys as threatening and menacing and problematic. And we start seeing Black girls as over-sexualized and older than they are. We see Black children as not innocent, not in need of being protected. And so when trauma happens to them, we kind of have this mentality of Black resilience and Black strength. And so we're not addressing that trauma and providing services and support. And so we have American systems like our child welfare system that disrupts Black families. We have housing projects that for many decades would not allow Black fathers to be in the home legally. We have school systems that are suspending and kicking out Black children. And so they're ending up on the streets in detention centers and things like that. And so all of those situations are leaving them vulnerable because they're not where they should be in school, or we're not nurturing the family that they're growing up in. And so they're more vulnerable to people that choose to exploit them or play on the fact that they're going through systems that don't recognize their need to be protected. In particular, when we put them in systems like juvenile detention and child welfare, we already know that 70 to 85% of sex trafficking victims have a history of interaction with the child welfare system. And so when you have Black children statistically overrepresented in that population, then we're going to have them overrepresented in trafficking victims as well.
Yes, thank you, because you always blow me away with your expertise and just how eloquent and just elaborate you're able to be with this. And I think that especially in a time right now, everything going on in the world, obviously racism is always and has always been, but the intersection of how this impacts trafficking with all these conspiracies about trafficking kind of popping up, I think is really important to have your expertise. So I really appreciate you sharing that, and would like your opinion professionally as well as personally on how do we, each of us on this call, start to dismantle and change the very blatant and real discrimination of services provided for those communities of color in regards to human trafficking, but also just in regards to, in general, about all the things that you just spoke on. How do we as individuals start to dismantle these things within our own homes and our own communities?
Well, I mean, one of the things that we're very purposeful about, and something that needs to be happening in communities and definitely needs to happen within the anti-trafficking movement because it's not happening, is we need to center Black expertise, Black leadership, and Black voices. We all know that for our particular populations, when we go to access services, we need to see service providers that look like us. We need to have people in positions of making decisions that look like us. We need to have people at the community decision-making level that look like us. We need people in federal government that look like us. And that goes forward for communities of color, for LGBTQ population, we need to have representation. And that representation not only needs to be in interacting with clients directly, but at every stratosphere of decision making. So that's a key piece. When we look at what's happening in this country right now, and one of the things that we're really trying to equip people is that as well-meaning as white people are, when it comes to racial justice, we have got to quit centering ourselves, and we have got to step out of the way. I can mean the best things in the world, but I can't speak to things the way Leslie can, or Ebony can, or Samuel on my team. So when we go and we line up speakers for an event, or we try to schedule someone to give expert testimony, or even when we just do a press release or interview regarding our work, I'm not the person on camera. I'm not the person on the stand. I'm not the person in the picture, because we have 3 fantastic Black leaders on our team, and we take their lead and center their expertise in the things that we do. When you look at human trafficking, we have Monique Morris, who wrote Push Out, is an amazing leader in the field. When we look at the issue of mass incarceration in America, we have Michelle Alexander and Brian Stevenson, who are incredible experts, and they're leading the field. So we have some fantastic Black leaders and Black experts in this field. And I think it's time for us as a community, particularly white people, to learn how to shut up and take the back seat and really center Black leadership and Black voices in finding solutions.
Yeah, perfectly stated. And with that, and I mean, you already kind of touched on it, but just to reiterate, how do we empower and not speak for the communities that need to be in the forefront? So in these racial issues, how do we just empower the voices versus, because unfortunately as white people, we just have gotten this platform of where we overstep our boundaries, like you said, with that great intent to want to help, but then we oftentimes overtake the spotlight, so to say. And so how can we specifically in the anti-trafficking organizations, movement, just empower those voices outside? And I think what I'm trying to say is, like, outside of just having people come share their stories, because Black, brown, white, purple, green, yellow, whatever, like, let's kill the, like, hey, come share your story, but you're good enough to come share your story, but you're not good enough for me to hire you onto my board. You're not good enough for me to pay for your expertise. You're not good enough for me to employ you, but you're good enough to come share your trauma. Let's cut that right now. For everybody on here, we have to get out of that mentality, because what comes with lived experience is expertise, right? Now, we still as survivors are responsible to empower and master certain skills and become emotionally intelligent to be able to expand ourselves outside of just our stories. But we have to, as a community, stop allowing people to come share their story, but not engaging them as experts and paying them as experts as well. So with that, I kind of went on to a tangent, but Sam, I kind of wanted to just talk about how do we key points that we can have people write down to how do we empower the voices in the communities of color when it comes specifically to anti-trafficking work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, something that we're really bad at, and that's give up power, hand over opportunities. And we're kind of really competitive and cutthroat as survivors, and we're all struggling usually. And so that's not a comfortable thing to do. I'll be honest, when you first invited me, I looked at who was speaking on this, and if there weren't survivors of color and diversity on this panel, I wasn't going to participate. If this was a panel that was more focused on racism, I probably would have declined and asked if one of my team members could step in. And so just being able to practice not centering yourself and giving up opportunity if it's not a situation that supports your values. People will invite me to do things that sound more high level, and if it's not something that I can do in conjunction with one of my team members of color, I tell them that's how we operate. That's how we make decisions at Justice, and if that's not something they support, then we're probably not the organization to collaborate with them. But I give up opportunities. I step back. I decline things that don't support the values of our organization. And so I think just having a value statement that supports anti-racism and sticking by that, even when it costs you money or opportunities. And that's not something we are good at.
Right. No, I think that's a really valid and great point. And just to add on to that, like, this work is not going anywhere, guys. Like, this issue is not going to end tomorrow. Even if no more exploitation happened at this moment, the trauma and the healing and the generational curses that have to be broken through the trafficking that's already happened, we still got many decades of work to do. And so us, especially as those with lived experience, like, if it's not your expertise, if it doesn't talk to your experience, it's okay to empower the next person to be lifted and put on that pedestal, to allow them, because they're going to be able to speak to a whole nother group of people with experience that identify with them, versus me trying to go up and, like you said, Sam, like me trying to go up talking about how it is for Black women in Black communities and how that impacts them. How do I look going up trying to talk about that when I'm a woman, but I'm not a Black woman? And I have too many people around me that have that expertise to not empower and lift them, because part of the solution in ending exploitation is empowerment. Self-empowerment is us knowing that we have a value in our voice. And if it's somebody constantly telling us we don't, and constantly taking that head spotlight in that role, then we are ultimately, if I'm doing that to the next survivor, I'm ultimately exploiting them in my own professional way and keeping them locked into their story and their exploitation. So thank you for just...
Well, and I would even say, like, be willing to do grunt work, be willing to do stuff that it's not exactly what you would love to be doing, but it helps support an issue that you know needs addressing. So when all these things were happening and I was trying to be supportive of my team members, and I was in so much pain personally and just hurting with what was happening across the country, and I saw, like, I'm not going to name names, but I saw these national anti-racist experts, and the way that they were experts was centering white experience in overcoming white bias. And I knew from teaching my classes in the past and things like that, that's not what is successful. The only way you can really expand your worldview is to be able to see things from another perspective. And so when I started the Dismantling the Privilege courses, I just, like, to be really transparent, the last thing in the world I wanted to do was sit in a room full of clueless white people that didn't understand what racism was. That was not my idea of a good time. But it was heavy lifting that I, as a white person, could do with other white people, because it's work I've done for over 20 years for my personal education, as well as I've done it as a college student and as a professor and things like that. So it was my way to contribute without centering me as a white person, but it was a way for me to kind of, like, take down the racism in this country piece by piece. And it's turned into a really cathartic experience. And these people have really impressed me with their willingness to embrace and learn and change. But I'm just, like, to be totally transparent, when that first started, and I had 400 people sign up when I offered that course, and I was like, oh my God, I don't want to do this. You know, and I really structured the class to where people had to do their own lifting and their own homework, and we would come together and have facilitated conversations. But I'm just like, you can ask some of my team members, I was griping when I first started this, because it's like, this was not what I felt like doing to make a difference. But it was something I could do. And I'm really glad that I did now. And it really has helped a huge group of professional white people that work in the anti-trafficking field. It has helped them understand systemic racism in a very real and concrete way.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing, not only sharing, but thank you for all the work that you're doing in yourself, your own healing, as well as this huge issue that is so much to take on. So I appreciate you very much. And thank you so much for that insight. I think with that, I want to go over to Penny, sorry. Just because I think with the system, talking about system impact and things like that, I really would like to get some of your insight. I know you shared that you will be, part of your experiences through system as a youth, so foster youth. So can you explain to us just, like, how your involvement within foster youth directly subjected you to becoming a victim of CSEC. And when I say CSEC, for anybody who isn't aware, CSEC is just the terminology for commercial sexual exploitation of children. If anybody doesn't know, a minor is automatically, there doesn't have to be a third-party profiter for it to be human trafficking in a minor if you are not old enough to consent. The exchange of sexual favors for anything, whether that be shelter, food, clothing, money, is automatically, that child is a victim of human trafficking. So when I say CSEC, that's just the terminology that we use to identify a child victim. And so with that, can you explain kind of how directly being a part of the foster system impacted you and ultimately helped you to become a victim of CSEC?
So to me, the pipeline of foster youth to victim of exploitation is direct. You have trauma that predisposes you to be vulnerable to exploitation from the get-go. You know, for me personally, it was as soon as I was born, I was being abused. And so that really just primed me to be vulnerable to further abuse. And so really it's the feeling of loneliness, of being unloved, of having no family, of really just wanting someone who you think understands you, and ultimately just being made vulnerable to people who are going to exploit you in any way that they can, just from day one.
Right. And how, with your experience, how often, and I don't mean, we don't need like an exact number, but how often do you feel like you came across somebody, whether that be a teacher, that be a case manager, that be just a foster parent, whether that be somebody within your schools, whatever, how many times do you think during your actual active exploitation, do you think you came across somebody who should have been able to recognize or just been able to ask you like, hey, is everything okay?
So that question is kind of complicated because a lot of the adults, mandated reporters, whatever, a lot of them in my life knew exactly what was happening and where that was leading, but they didn't know how to approach it and how to remove me from that vulnerability. So like they can see it, they could say, hey, you know, you're making these really dangerous choices that are going to get you further hurt. But they just didn't really know how to effectively pull me out of it, because a big part of it was the relationships that I was forming with people that I felt were more meaningful than the relationship I had with my social worker or my foster mom. And I felt, you know, like this person understands me more than you ever will. And it's less about, you know, them recognizing the signs of what's happening and more them being able to approach that and being able to say, hey, let's sit down and talk about this so that we can help make you safer.
Right. So not necessarily, it's not that we don't know what we're seeing. It's more we don't know how to approach the conversation around it, as well as approach like, okay, if I do have the conversation, like now what? Like,
right. Because I mean, I was just in a space where I was so stubborn, and I thought that, you know, I know what's best for me. You know, don't talk to me like I'm a little kid. I know what I'm doing, but I didn't.
Right.
And these adults really wanted to help me out of the situation that I was creating for myself and that was being created for me, but they just didn't know. Like my foster mom, I loved her so much. But at the time I didn't really realize that. And I really just thought, you know, she's trying to get in the way of my happiness, and she's trying to be, you know, someone who's just pulling me out of living my own life. But she was really trying to help me be safe. And I think had we had more communication and both of us had more education, a lot of the trauma that I experienced probably could have been avoided.
Right. So is it safe to say your suggestion as far as on an advocacy side and organizational side, what we can do within the system is to not only empower the identifying factors, but also empower and really dive in and equip families and those people that come in contact with the youth on what next steps to take and how to even, not even next steps, but how to even have these proper conversations without it being combative or furthering the youth into going into a darker space.
Yeah, that's a big part of it for me is not being able to recognize what's going on, because most foster parents, most social workers, they can look at what a child is doing and they can recognize that's unhealthy, that's very dangerous, and that's going to lead down a really dark path. But a lot of them just don't know how to approach it. Right. You know, and so it would lead to just like big blowout arguments and nothing would happen. And I would just go further down that rabbit hole and just make myself more and more vulnerable because I felt so disconnected from these people who were just trying to get closer to me. But it felt to me like they were pushing me away.
Right. That's super insightful and really, really helpful. I think probably to a lot of people on here. So thank you. And again, if we have time to get back into more questions to each of the panelists at the end, I want to touch a little bit more on this, but I appreciate you sharing. I'm really proud of you for sharing, FYI, and I think you are doing awesome. So thank you, because that was really helpful information.
Thank you.
And I kind of want to jump over to Connie, because I feel like foster youth, we think of family when we think of foster oftentimes, or we think of system. And so I kind of want to engage in your experience. I know you had shared that you will be sharing a little bit about your familial trafficking that you experienced. And so just as a baseline for family trafficking, I just want to know on a personal level, do you feel like your experience with familial trafficking looks anything like what the media or movies portray it to be?
It's media and movies. No, it doesn't. It doesn't look anything at all like that. Because think about it. So I'll just share my personal journey just a little bit, and I think this will help paint the picture, Jamie, if I may. So imagine a little girl being raised in a Catholic and Greek Orthodox upper middle class family in the suburbs of Tampa, living on the water, going to a Catholic school, right, going to church 2 and 3 times a week, and having this family that from the outside world looked like the perfect family. Yet behind closed doors, my brother and I were being sexually, mentally, and physically abused. And then along with that was all the domestic violence, but there was so much dysfunction that was going on behind closed doors, and no one saw it. Because when we were in the outside world, you didn't see it. We were not allowed to talk about it. So incest, because that's where this starts. Okay, so familial sex trafficking is about having first sex with your child, and that is incest, and that is not anything that anyone ever really talks about other than maybe SUV, right? The TV show. And so because we don't have those conversations, how is media, how is the film industry really going to portray what is really happening when it's familial sex trafficking? And so one of the things that we also know, that about 70 to 92%, and I'm not one that really likes to quote statistics because the moment they come out of your mouth, they change. However, what we do know is about 70 to 92% of sex trafficking victims, they were sexually abused as a young child. And approximately 30% of sex trafficking survivors, it was a family member. Now think about that for a moment. That's a really large percentage. And so for myself, mine was, and I probably will answer one of your other questions in with this, Jamie, so I apologize for doing that, lumping it all in together, but I think it paints a little bit better picture. So for me, it started at 2 years old, and it was sexual abuse and pornography. And of course, there was exploitation that came into that. So for me, what did I learn? I learned that in order to have my father pay attention to me, I had sex with him. Now, some of you might be wondering, how can you have sex at 2 years old? Well, there's all kinds of things that you can do to a child. And also some of you might be wondering, well, how do I remember that it was 2 years old. The brain is an incredible little part of our body, right? Of who we are, of our psyche. And so my brother at one point shared that he described a shower scene. And my brother was 18 months older than I am. He's recently passed away. And he shared a shower scene, and it was the same exact shower scene that I remembered and that I could see myself as this little bitty girl. So that's how I was able to track it back to 2. So let's just take that off the table right there. Moving forward. So 14 years of my life was incest. It was having sex with my father almost every single day of my life before going to church, having to sit in church. Imagine sitting in church and watching your mom sing in the choir and knowing what you just did with your dad. And that control, that because there's control in power. It's also, you know, a lot of people think that if it's a family member, that there's no quotas. That is so wrong. That is so wrong. But for me, so 14 years of having sex with this man. And then right before my 16th birthday, he said to me, I had made a decision, I was done. And he said, no, you're not. We have been waiting for this day to come. A little bit longer story than I'm going to give you. We've been waiting for this day to come. I said, what do you mean? He said, you are now going to be a prostitute. I literally thought to myself, because I'm 63, okay, I'll be 64. So this is back in the 70s, all right? So for me, what did I know about prostitutes? What I saw on TV. And it was usually a white woman, very, very harsh looking, right? Big hair, lots of makeup, and false eyelashes. That's what I knew. And I said, okay, because in my brain, I said, I'm going to be a 16-year-old. I'm a white Christian girl in an upper middle class family. What does that really mean? And on top of, I thought to myself, well, maybe then someone will finally figure out what's going on behind closed doors. Fast forward the next 4 years of my life, I was trafficked. Now, a lot of my brothers and sisters that are on here today, you know, a lot of them walk the streets. They were incarcerated. You know, I was blessed. And I know that might sound strange, that was not part of my story, but I was the party favor. So I never jumped out of the cake, but if there was a party going on in Tampa and it was the politicians and the judges, the very affluential folks in Tampa or in the Tampa Bay area, my dad got the phone call and literally I was dropped off and I was the party favor at night. I still went to school. I still maintained A's and B's. You know, I skipped a lot of school because I had to service buyers out in the parking lot of my high school. But I'm here to say that this is so prevalent. And in my organization, and a lot of it has to do with a lot of us that have organizations, we find ourselves that the survivors that we serve, their stories are very similar to ours. And so for me, I serve a lot of survivors that are survivors of incest, you know, childhood sexual abuse, and that it's familia, and that it's family members, and it is rampant. And now with COVID, we cannot keep our services. I mean, we cannot keep up with what is happening with COVID.
Thank you so much. I think that, at least in my personal opinion, for me, all exploitation is difficult to hear about. But for me, something about the familial aspect, obviously children and the incest is not a part of my experience personally. It always holds on to my heart, and I always appreciate learning more. Because just because we are experts on our experience doesn't mean we are experts on human trafficking as a whole, right? I'm only an expert on my lived experience. Specifically urban domestic sex trafficking, as you said, I did walk the streets. I did a lot of different things that maybe you didn't experience. And so us as survivors, in order to come up with solutions as a whole as well, we have to listen to other survivors' experiences, because that's an area I don't know anything about, but I want to be able to help figure out being a part of the solution. And so with that, kind of going into my last question for you at this moment, but what do we do as people who don't have lived experience, who don't necessarily have knowledge on incest, who don't necessarily have knowledge on trafficking in general, how do we within our families start to work from inside our families outward to prevent and be good community members against familial trafficking, as well as just be that kind of, take out that, well, that's not my business. What they got going on in their house is not my business. But in actuality, it is our business.
It is our business.
Community, I hope that question makes sense. How do we be a part of the solution against familial trafficking?
So I want to start with this first. Okay, so the Counter Trafficking Data Collaborative said that 1 in 4 trafficking cases start with family members. 1 in 4. Let that sink in for a moment. Okay, and now what do? First, let's talk about how can we make you proactive? How can we have this conversation about being proactive instead of being reactive? Because when we're reactive, we don't get anything done. When we put blinders on, we don't get anything done. And so one of the things that I do when I do trainings around this is I talk about, look at what happened to you. And I'm talking about when speaking to educators and healthcare professionals, right? Anyone that interacts with children. Look at what happened to you as a child, and have you ever addressed it? And I'm not saying you have to go through years of therapy. I'm saying, have you ever addressed it? Because here's what happens. When that child comes to you or you see the signs, instead of doing something about it, you're going to turn a blind eye because you don't want to tap into what happened to you. So that's pretty powerful, right? The other part of it is,
on the side.
When you see something, we hear this saying, when you see something, say something. It is imperative. It is imperative that each one of us use our voices in such a way, because, if we're wrong, we're wrong. But let's talk about how many times you could be right. If we know that 1 in 3 little girls are being sexually abused and 1 in 6 boys are being sexually abused, and that's before their 18th birthday. How prevalent is this? It's happening. It's happening on both sides of you and in front and back of you, and so think about that for a moment. And what can you do? So learn the signs. Don't be afraid. Know who to call. Know who runs sex crimes in your community. If you don't know that, when you call 911, say, that's who I need to speak to. This is what I'm seeing. And don't give up. Because we all know you can make one phone call and nothing might happen, right? Don't give up. Keep making those phone calls. And if you can be that person, now I don't talk about who safe people are, right? Because parents are your safe person. And if it's your parent or loved one that's perpetrating on you and they're your safe person, then what are all the other people that are out there? So it's about a person that you can go to, that you can have a conversation with, that you know that if you go and you confide to them, that they will step up and they will do something. But also be mindful about what you do. Because just like in domestic violence, when someone comes forward, when is the most critical time that someone is going to be injured, that someone is going to be beaten? Right? Because when a child says no, and they're not going to have sex with someone, right? They're beaten. They're silenced. They don't want anyone to know what is happening behind closed doors.
Right. Thank you again so much for just your knowledge, and also coinciding that with just your personal experience. I know there's going to be lots of people who are interested in learning more about your organization, which we have listed on our resource list that you all will receive. And so hopefully we have some more time at the end to come back around to this topic. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And with that, I want to go into, I think I'm going to go over to Sarah, if you're good. All right, awesome. And I want to go over to you because I feel like familial trafficking is a topic that is oftentimes not spoken as much about as possibly, urban domestic sex trafficking or the sex trafficking that we see on the TV screen. And I think that your experience talks to something very similar, which is trafficking and exploitation within the entertainment industry. And so with that, I want to just ask you to explain a little bit about how you being in the entertainment industry, explain a little bit about what kind of entertainment you were into and how that directly linked to your exploitation.
Well, I had to regain my composure here because the lady before me kind of brought some things to my attention. But I was sexually abused very early on, so it left that normalization in the family for things being sexualized to be really normal. I was a surrogate wife to an abusive father. And so what happened is I got into cosmetology school, and these older men would get their hair cut, and they would talk with me about how pretty I was. I kind of noticed that I tend to attract men between the ages of 40 and 70. And I believe that it's not to victim shame, but there's something about a certain kind of predator, a certain kind of I believe that they are an addict or an offender a lot of the time, who kind of has a practicing grounds for this sort of thing. And when you are in the entertainment industry, you have to climb ladders. So you need to build your portfolio. They say like you want to get into modeling, you want to get into commercial, you want to get into even like Barbizon. There was a company in San Francisco where they have a certain modeling type, and I was too short, and like my weight didn't match. Like they really specify how you're not good enough. So these older men, in my experience, obviously, came along and they say, oh, well, I'll help you I need to build my portfolio. You need to build your portfolio. You're gorgeous. Have you ever considered independent modeling? So you talk to a kid or a teenager in my experience, or like, 20s, and you say, hey, one, you're attractive, and two, you could make money off of being attractive. You're talking to someone who's like, I'm just going to make people look pretty for a living. This sounds fun to me. And this old man is telling me that I'm attractive, which is something that has been inappropriate in my family background. And so it became this sort of, they would take me to these things called TF shoots. And this is something that I really want to focus on, because these are things that are not spoken about. That you can make a group on Facebook, you can make a website, you can make anything you want online, completely free, and create these meetup groups. They're called photo walks. There are these predatory photographers that are in these photo walks that do free photography for the sake of building their portfolio. And so because they're building their portfolio, they go into these groups where it looks like a hobby. Like if you're young enough, everything looks kind of like a hobby, and you're out there getting your picture taken. You walk with a group of photographers, about I would say 10 to 15 photographers, 8 to 10 models all go in, and you just feel like this is a big hobby that everybody's a part of. But in my experience, there were very older men that would specifically target girls that looked similar to me, that had similar stories to me, and that kind of dressed similar to me. And they would do these trade for. And eventually, and the trade for pictures are, I give you photos, you give me your modeling work. And they try to convince you like, oh, my gear's so expensive, I would be charging a lot of money, but because we're doing this trade for thing, you need to understand my value. And so you're like, oh my gosh, this is first time modeling, I've never done this before. They build a bond with you the same way that you would build a bond with a parent, with a dad. You would build a bond with a dad. They build a bond with you on a level that is like, they take you out to eat, they get you things that are nice, and they go and they take photos of you, and eventually it gets to a point where you're doing things that are more sexualized each time. And so I believe that these groups, they're just really hidden because they're not making money, and they're put out there even by churches. The group that I was a part of was from a church, so they put it out there as like, this is a photo walk group where people are building their portfolios, but these predators were in there and they were looking for girls like me.
Yeah, and I think that that's, thank you for sharing that, because this is an area that we don't touch on a lot. We don't touch on trafficking through entertainment, and even the ways that it creates such a easy platform for grooming, right? Like, the trafficking doesn't necessarily have to happen through the entertainment industry, but the grooming process through entertainment, and then you add in social media, and we live in a social media society, and you add in that acceptance of like, this is where my value comes from, is how many likes or how beautiful my pictures are, or how many people can comment on my photo. That desire to be accepted is just so easily interlinked, right? And so it becomes almost like this platform of vulnerabilities for our youth especially, or young adults, to just present to these managers or these photographers or whatever it's called. And it's funny that you say the word hobby, because I know in my experience, I did a lot of my prostitution, engaged a lot of on the streets as well as online, and it was actually called hobby, and like, which I thought was kind of a sick, like twisted thing for these guys to be calling their buying me a hobby.
Yeah.
But I think that that is a direct correspondence to how interlinked these things really are. And so with your experience, and I know that you are, as you stated, you know, new, and just knowing you on a personal level, knowing that this is all new to you, and this is all, you're still developing, as we all are, peeling back those layers, right? But in your experience and what you're seeing, what do you feel like we and the audience can do to not only raise awareness around the issue of the direct link of trafficking in the entertainment industry, but how do we, what could have been done for you to block that path? Or what could somebody that you interacted with have done to divert you from, or help you recognize that this was something that wasn't normal in your desire to want to be an entertainer?
Well, something that's extremely common in families with the normalization of sexualizing the children or the teen is that you kind of have this idea that you don't need to tell people where you're going. You don't need to tell people what you're doing. You can leave when you want. You can go wherever you want. I remember I used to be dropped off places for like a week, and my parents just didn't know. Like they left me there, and people would be like, when are you leaving? And, you know, I got used to this idea of nobody cares where I am. Nobody cares about me at all. And so these photographers, they come in and they take you to lunch. They buy you things. I went out on a shoot one time that was 6 hours long for the entire day, and was taken out to an orchard and on train tracks and all these different locations that seemed very strange. The guy would say things like, you know, you need to learn to get comfortable with being touched. I don't like it when you work with other photographers. It makes me uncomfortable. He was married and everything, but he was just like, I feel like I'm falling for you. The whole grooming process. I think what would have been huge, what I wish so much that I would have had help with, is somebody being like, where are you going to go? Like, can you give me the address of where you're going? You know, who is this guy? Do you know much about him? Can we meet him and his family? You know, that kind of thing. And I mean, I was seen as a grown woman because I was in my 20s. And so I just saw it as like, you know, you're an adult, you're making your decisions. But I was also being trafficked by my partner at the time via webcam. So I had a partner that had normalized sexual behavior as well. So really everyone in my circle that could have protected me, they were actually creating almost all of the victimization. And so I was just in a circle of predators. I was in the middle of it. And I think if I have learned anything, it's that I need to connect with people and I need to tell people where I'm going. Every single one of my sexual assaults, every single one of my trafficking experiences, being taken hostage, all of it has come from me not telling people who I'm meeting, where I'm going. And it's because in a background with a family that doesn't care about you, your livelihood and where you go and what you're doing doesn't matter. So in some way, if schools are able to kind of teach kids or teenagers, like, always tell where you're going, and not in like a consequent sort of do this or else, but like compassion. I had no compassion whatsoever, and so I thought I was like this tough kid. I could go anywhere. I did one shoot that was 14 hours and 6 outfit changes, and that was exhausting. I ended up passing out at photo shoots and waking up with people above me. I've been in multiple situations like that, and just like, they say things like, you know, you're bonding with this old man who takes on this identification kind of like a dad. You're bonding with him. He's getting you gifts. He's doing all this other stuff. And as soon as you don't do something right, it's lose my number. And I don't have family. I don't have any family at all. So I would go back home after this whole experience and have my son and just be like, oh my God, like, he's just gone. This person's just gone. It's the same concept of the whereabouts, the information doesn't matter. I want to get as much information as possible in these groups, like these Facebook groups and these online TF photo shoots need to have more background checks on men between the ages of 40 and 70. Sorry if that's, you know, like judgy or whatever, but that is what I think. I also think that there needs to be a question of whether they're porn watchers, because a lot of pornography with orgasmic conditioning trains the brain to normalize and motivate towards certain behaviors. And if you have someone that's already kind of in an offender behavior sort of mindset, they are using these places as practice grounds, hunting grounds for what they're going to do later on. Mm-hmm. And I felt that.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. And unfortunately, we had a couple of panelists that had to pull out of this panel. But I do want to touch a little bit on the issue of porn. Thank you again for sharing, because I think that this is a really great segue for people to get interested in understanding entertainment and the intersection with trafficking, because especially with the youth, because there's so many youth that want to get into different aspects of entertainment, and it's not just modeling, right? It's like, it's music, it's production.
Yeah. And I've done all of that.
Right. Studios are a breeding ground for grooming young rappers, young singers, all of these things, especially in places like Atlanta, San Diego, everywhere. Yeah. And so just engaging in these conversations. Obviously, we have a 3-hour panel. We still are running out of time. So with that, just to open these platforms for people to go on their own to be able to see, like, okay, I'm interested in that. Like, this is impacting me, and I think that this is something I need to look into for my family. I want to touch on the pornography aspect just really quick. I have not a huge experience in pornography, but I was exploited through pornography for a small period of my exploitation. And just the gist of that industry, like, it's horrific, it's sickening. The auditions are literally rape. Yeah. There's no sugarcoating it. Literally, you audition by being raped, and then you're told, like, oh, well, you're good for the part or you're not. And they sugarcoat it in a way of like, well, we need to see your skills and what you're capable of, right? And so even the mentality of the fact that we have as a society, and I made a post about this on Sisters of the Streets Facebook, we have chosen to compartmentalize what we view as exploitation and what we don't view as exploitation. And so because pornography has been labeled this entertainment, literally it's entertainment, the only reason that it's not prostitution is because it's being filmed, literally because it's being filmed, and we found a loophole to address it as entertainment. And so there we compartmentalize the fact that, well, if I'm only clicking on a link, and I use this example often, so somebody may never go on the street where I was being exploited and have ever purchased me and had me hop in their car and pay me for a sexual act, but they just go home from work and they click on the pornography link. If I'm not corresponding and correlating the link between pornography and sexual exploitation and trafficking, and I'm viewing it as entertainment, I'm then, my hands are clean, right? Like, I don't have to be guilty because I'm not going to the streets to buy a prostitute. I'm just clicking on this entertainment where this woman or man wants to be doing this. They're getting paid for it, and there's no direct correspondence to trafficking. And so we purposely compartmentalize what we allow ourselves to view as exploitive, and we can't do that. And we as a society have to stop doing that, because pornography is definitely exploitive just because of the label of entertainment or acting or whatever. And like you said, what that does, literally, I'm not a scientist by any, but there's literal neurological things that are going on where these acts, like if you Google what is the number one, in the top 5 like most searchable pornography topics, you're going to see adolescents, you're going to see teens, things that have to do with teens, 18, fresh 18, fresh 19, whatever. It's going to be teens, which shows our link to incest, to child pornography, things like that. It's also going to be things like rape or fetishes or submission, domination, things like that. And so what that does for us in our mind is we look at that woman acting that she likes to be raped, and we then, when that entertainment is not enough for us, then maybe we go to like a doll, or maybe we go to our partner, or then when our partner is accepting of it, then we go to a prostitute, because a prostitute in society's eyes is dispensable, and nobody's going to miss that prostitute if I go and take out all of my rape fantasies, beating fantasies, neglectful things. I can't present these to my wife or my husband because they're going to view me as like, oh, what are you talking about? But let me go to this prostitute to do that to her, because she's a prostitute. In our minds in society, we have degraded prostitution to the point of where we're not even humans anymore, male or female. And so again, well, I'm talking about solutions, and we always want to be focused on solutions, right? Well, we're having these engaging conversations. When it comes to solutions, before the resources can happen, we have to change our minds as human beings. We have to change how we approach these conversations and stigmatizations and bias in our own minds, because if we can't even figure out how to view a prostitute or a person being prostituted as a human being, we are allowing these fetishes, these acceptances, these justifications of rapists, murderers, people that are seeking fetishes, seeking satisfaction through fetishes. We are a part of justifying that. If we are simply looking at the girl walking down the street and saying like, oh, she looks like a hooker, she looks like a prostitute, oh, she's a hoe, we are feeding into this mentality that it's okay to diminish and degrade people being exploited. And I hope that that comes out the way that I want it to come out. But there is a very direct link in our mental and morale approaches, in our conversations with our family, our children, within our households, to the thriving of exploitation. That is my only soapbox. I had to hop on it really quick because you mentioned porn, so thank you for mentioning that. And with talking about porn, I feel like that goes over gracefully to my friend Wendy and her expertise on the demand, because we cannot talk about trafficking without talking about the demand, because if there's no demand, there's no supply. And if, you know, like, come on guys, it's not neuroscience. Like, if there's nobody buying, there's nothing to sell. So how do we break these issues of demand, and how do we get these to the forefront of this being what the important topics are? How do we address the demand first before addressing those that are being exploited? Because in some ways we're doing these things backwards, right? And so Wendy, why is focusing on the demand so important? And can you explain those who may be on here who don't understand the dynamics of what the demand is and why it is the ultimate driver to exploitation? You're muted. You're talking to yourself. You're muted. We can't hear you.
There. Yeah. So as soon as Sarah started talking about pornography and then you segued into talking about pornography, I'm going, they're covering demand. Because the issue of pornography and how it drives demand is critical to understand when we're talking about how to deal with demand. A little bit of a backstory on my involvement with addressing the demand. It was so not intentional whatsoever. But I had already been working in the field of fighting human trafficking as a victim advocate and as a case manager. And I was going through a little transition there in my career, and somebody put a little bug in my ear and said, hey, have you heard about what's going on over in the North Dakota oil fields? And I say this jokingly, but it's very true. I had no idea where North Dakota even was. I'm a California girl, you know, and I was just like, no, what's an oil boom? Like, what, North Dakota, what? And just kind of it went in one ear and out the other. And they were like, yeah, a lot of human trafficking is going on over there. And I had already understood the fact that the issue of human trafficking was not being addressed in rural America. I started my career in fighting human trafficking in Montana. And so I was actually visiting my grandkids in Montana, and I went to church, and this guy came up to me and he said, hey, I didn't even think about this. So listen to this, because it's a good kind of way for people to understand how normalized exploitation and trafficking and even sexual assault, pedophilia, and all of that is. Like, it's so normalized these days. People are not shocked by it, except for this guy, which I was super thankful. He said, I did not even think about it until I saw you. Knowing that I was a survivor, knowing that I was doing the work of fighting human trafficking. He said, but I'm over in the North Dakota oil fields. And I was like, second time in a week I've heard this, so I'm paying attention now. And he said he was in a man camp. And I was like, what the heck is a man camp? And he said, and the other night there was a group of guys who were ordering a bunch of girls. And one of them asked if they had any 11-year-olds. And he said, and I didn't even think about it until I saw you. But what he was asking me, what do I do in a situation like that? And instantly I was like, where is North Dakota? What is an oil boom? What's a man camp? I have to know about this. So he was shocked at how this random guy just very comfortably said something about ordering a child for sex in a group of men. Like, most people think most men would kick someone's ass, excuse my language, right, for even referring to sex with a child. But nobody responded to this. And that was quite shocking to him. And it wasn't shocking to me, but I kind of understood it. 2 days later, I went to go visit my youth group, and a 14-year-old girl who I had known since she was about 10 came running up to me, and she said, hey, I got a job. It's over in North Dakota. And I'm like, you're 14. Like, what are you going to North Dakota for? And she said, I'm going to go work on a food truck and make $1,000 a week. And instantly I was like, okay, how do I get to North Dakota? So I showed up there, and it was a very tiny, demographically, a very tiny area of rural America that was experiencing the largest oil boom in America. And so thousands and thousands and thousands of working men, executives, lots of money, were flooding into this area that demographically was like almost like a wasteland, almost like, you know, nowhere, no man's land. And still in my mind, I was thinking, okay, I'm going to connect with the domestic violence shelters. I'm going to connect with law enforcement. I'm going to connect with people who I would think or know are interacting with victims, possibly being brought in. And I did, and very few people had even understood the terminology of human trafficking or sex trafficking. They were saying, yeah, the hookers are here. Yep, the hookers are here. And so I started to do some education, and very, very quickly found out that it was an area in crisis, because you have an influx of men with a lot of money, and the male-female ratio was about 100 men to every 1 woman. So it was kind of crazy dynamics. And so as I was there, in doing my outreach, I'm considered an expert in the field of outreach and crisis care. So that means I go into the areas where that are vulnerable to trafficking, such as strip clubs and nightclubs and things like that. In rural America, you don't really have the blade or tracks. And as I was there, I started to connect with the men. Like, pretty much, if you were not a sex worker or someone there to be exploited sexually, it's almost like, what were you doing there as a woman, you know? And so I even multiple times, it was assumed that I was there working in prostitution or stripping. And I just got very free and very comfortable with the guys I would interact with and tell them, I'm actually an advocate for victims of human trafficking. And I mean, the response I would get from that, right, is just like, what does that even mean? And so I got to do a lot of one-on-one education with men to I'm trying to look at this. I got to interact really face to face with the men who were there. And I came to understand, just like when you have human trafficking and you've got all these different lanes, right? You've got foster care and you've got all these different lanes in fighting human trafficking. In addressing demand, you have a lot of different lanes as well. You have got the predatorial type buyer, right? I think everybody's pretty much comfortable with the 101 on human trafficking and how it is demand driven, right? Like, there is a demand. There are people buying human beings. There are people buying children and women and men for sex. And so you've got those predatorial, those evil ones who are like hunters, who intend on doing harm, intend on being violent, intend on being just evil, right? That's actually a very, very small, when you take demand as a whole, that's a very small amount, not insignificant, but a small amount. What I found in North Dakota was most men were completely unaware that they were participating in the victimization of a human being. It took educating them. It took explaining to them, not only for what I experienced as a survivor, but the knowledge that I had from other people's experiences, the age of entry typically, right? Because they would be like, oh, they're adults, you know, they're making a choice. And I would say, but back up, what led them into? Like, if this isn't something you would want to see your daughter do or your sister do, what led them into being exploited, purchasing for sex, or feeling like selling sex was the only option that they had? And I could see that most men cared. And I know a lot of people, when I go into the non-shame-based the understanding where the behaviors come from, wanting to help. A lot of people get offended with that, right? Because they're created it to be monsters, and there are those that are the monsters, and they need to be dealt with harshly. But I truly think the best way to attack demand and address demand is through education and getting to the root of who men are. Most men are protectors. They do believe in chivalry, you know, even though that's like a dying art, but most men feel this natural desire to protect and defend women and children. It's just in their DNA. So if you can latch onto that and paint a picture to them and hold them accountable and say, I can't go into your locker room. I can't go into your men's groups. You know, I can't go into those intimate places, except for when the door would open, such as on outreach. So it's up to men. It's up to the men to hold men accountable. And so I started doing, my organization was called For Her North Dakota, and I started doing Man Up For Her events. These events would be attended like crazy, like sold out, standing room only. So men wanted to know. And the hard part, and the part that I'm still kind of recovering from, is not only do the traffickers not want the issue of demand to be paid attention to, because you're messing with their money, right? like there are plenty of vulnerable people out there, unfortunately, like to be picked from. Like, you know, if a trafficker or an exploiter loses someone that they're profiting off of, odds are it's going to be pretty darn easy for them to be replaced. But when you start shifting men's hearts and you stop sugarcoating it, right? This is a little rabbit trail. This is what I do often. But last night I was doing some refresher reading on, has there been any, you know, progress made in fighting demand since I kind of stepped back from all of this. And one of the points that really hit me was the terminology used by people outside of being a survivor, the terminology used to describe people in the sex industry there's a plethora of vulgar, inappropriate, descriptive words, such as hoe, whore, hooker, slut, you know, all of that. But when it comes to addressing demand and identifying demand, it's buyer and demand and John. Like buyer, demand, and John. That's the only way that they're described, right? And that just hit me. That was kind of like, okay, we need to shift the conversation in a non-shame based way, right? Because this is the really important part to understand that I just finally got in my pursuit of healing is trauma. Trauma is at the root of human behavior. And at some point you have the choice to lead with compassion and empathy as a result of your victimization, or you have a choice to become a victimizer as a result of your experience being victimized. Not only as a woman who has had relationships with men, I can say matter-of-factly, every single man I have been in an intimate relationship, married, boyfriend, long-term relationship, every single one of them suffered childhood trauma. Every single one of them. I can tell you that most every single man I've talked to in my work in pursuing to spread awareness about demand come to me with heartbreaking stories of surviving trauma. Even when children view porn, or anybody really views porn, it traumatizes the brain. And very, very rarely is there a message of empathy associated with pornography. So the message is, my brain's just been traumatized, and I see the outlet for that is to victimize someone, is to hurt someone, is to take someone, have power and control over someone, right? So that's the root message that porn sends. Instead of saying, I'm trying not to read the text, the chat box, because I'll get distracted. I don't know if there's questions or anything that you want me to answer over there, but we can go through. Another thing that I was really, really sad about yesterday when I was getting reacquainted with the information around demand is there's not a lot of information out there. There's not a lot of resources out there. So my role in this is to bring awareness and to try to facilitate conversations that is not shame-based, that recognizes demand is the issue. Demand is the solution, right? We have to address demand. But I can tell you, as a survivor and as a woman who's very comfortable in having these conversations with men, I'm not the one to do it. Even though it's been effective, even though I have had multiple men contact me, write me letters, send me texts and say, hey, because of you explaining the victimization associated with purchasing sex through any form, pornography, stripping, prostitution, I can't do it anymore. I can't enjoy watching porn anymore because of what you taught me about it. But yet, women speaking to men with authority, sharing our experiences and offering hope and empowerment to the demand side, we are so cut off from doing that. It's inappropriate, right? To most it just in society, period, right? We're looked at, especially survivors, oftentimes we're looked at as broken women, seducing women, that we're going to come in and pervert whatever's going on, specifically in the faith-based, right? The faith-based community, which is really, really sad. And I would challenge every single person here listening to, if you go to church and you have a pastor to go to, ask, why have we not addressed the issue of pornography and men who purchase sex and purchase children as much as, or if not more, as we're flashing pictures of girls tied up with duct tape over their mouth and rope tied around their arms? Like, that's the image. And you know why? Here's some really strong information for you. You know why? Is because the top 3 buyers of prostitution are pastors, law enforcement, and military. They are incredibly high stressful jobs. They cause vicarious trauma. And when someone is conditioned that sex is a release, right? When either through watching pornography, and watching pornography leads to the victimization of women or men or children, that's going to become their outlet for dealing with their stress. And especially in the Christian community, that sin, that habit, that is shoved down so far, because the men in leadership who should be addressing it aren't, most likely because they're struggling with it too. So we have a lot of work to do in addressing demand. And my hope, I mean, it just boggles my mind that there have been some great initiatives with demand reduction programs. Like almost every single state that adjusts laws and enacts laws on human trafficking almost always adopt the demand reduction laws and place them in their state laws. But nobody ever follows through. They might have the funding to put together a demand reduction program. But I have a feeling it's because there's still so much shame associated with the act of purchasing prostitution or struggling with pornography, right? I'm not even sure if I made a whole lot of sense. But until we start addressing childhood trauma and creating safe spaces for all people and men, right? Because we've created so many stereotypes on what does a hooker look like, right? Because most people, unless it's a child, don't think of the sex industry as a whole as a gateway to sex trafficking. They keep them separate. And they do that for a reason. And it's just like with the buyer or with the traffickers, right? There's a stereotypical image of what a trafficker looks like, what a pimp looks like. And it's very hard to shift that. And that has been created for a reason. And it's just like with the sex buyer, right? There's a stereotypical sex buyer, this greasy, pot-bellied, man who lurks around looking for somebody to prey upon. When, as a survivor of sex trafficking, someone who worked in the sex industry as a stripper, I can tell you the amount of times I sat with young adult males who felt immense guilt for purchasing prostitution. They felt like they were either pressured into it, they were insecure about their manhood. I know a lot of survivors who can recall stories of like being compassionate towards the sex buyer for their purchasing sex because it really messed with them. It wasn't something that they were proud of, but society is sensationalizing and normalizing, right? The exploitation of human beings, the degradation of human beings, the victimization of human beings. And to where now the younger generation almost brags about it. There is no shame in that behavior. So we've got this like split off. And it's going to take, I'm just going to say this right now, like if men don't rise up and start doing something about this, holding other men accountable, putting their efforts, this is going to be controversial and probably lead into a whole nother rabbit trail, but the upswing, the uprising of male-led organizations in the human trafficking movement is alarming. It's concerning to me. It has a million different red flags attached to it. And those men who are like, practicing on the weekend with their firearms and learning how to like, go in and do undercover ops because it's been, glamorized, and some of these orgs who talk about going in and, they're appealing to the man part of the male nature. They need to step away from that role and start addressing the demand. That's their role in the fight against human trafficking, right? Like if you're a man and you truly care about the issue of human trafficking, check your circle and then be a voice as a man to other men. Like when you hear other men degrading or bragging or belittling or glorifying the objectification of women, say something, right? But those just aren't conversations men to men are having. There's this uprising of like men coming into this movement who have exploited survivors, who have victimized survivors, who have stolen from survivors, and they're trying to tell us how to rescue victims. Are you following what I'm saying? It's like the male part of addressing demand got skipped over, and we just need to call out to men and hold them accountable. I have a total understanding of what creates demand, how to minimize demand, how to turn that around and have it be something that serves the fight against human trafficking. But until other men stand up to do that, I have very little hope, if that makes sense.
I think it also has to start with, like, before, you know, and thank you for your insight, but I also think that when we're thinking about trying to get groups of men to stand up and rise up, we're also almost skipping a factor as well. Like, most of us probably have direct interaction every day with a youth male who is going to grow up with these mentalities that drive demand, right? So whether it be our son, whether it be our nephews, whether it be a youth that we just interact with, whether it be our little brothers or whoever it is, we again have a huge power in the prevention aspect, right? Because everything that we're talking about on the demand side, this is all in a response to a problem that's already fully driven. So how do we, just like with preventing those from becoming pimps or traffickers or the people doing the exploited, we have to start way before any of this on a societal level. We have to start at home, and we have to start with how are we making our young men around us comfortable with sharing their emotions? How are we making young men around us know that their value does not, because when I try to address demand, quick story, like for some reason somebody had posted my Sisters of the Streets number to with some fake pictures to an ad a while back. And at first I was like, oh my gosh, I'm super triggered. Like, I'm getting all these text messages like, hey, are you available? Like, hey, $60 special, hey, $100 special. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I'm going to go into like a dark hole and like just go away from all this. But then when I started responding to these men with not a like, why are you buying women? I responded with like, hey, like, you know, you're more valuable than a 30-minute session with somebody you don't know who is just pretending to like you. Some of them didn't like me responding, but the few that I did get to engage in a conversation with, when you empower them from a place that's non-judgmental and you empower people from a place to know like, oh, you're right, like I do deserve more than a 30-minute hoopla or whatever, and then I don't even have to come out of pocket for it, like, and this girl's just pretending she likes me, she doesn't remember my name. And so these shameful focused demand addresses, as well as shameful focused trafficker and pimp address, like how we address that, it's not doing anything except making people want to shell up and not talk about these experiences, as Wendy said. And so it has to start way before men are grown, right? It has to start way before women are grown. Our vulnerabilities to go into exploitation have to start from when we're young. They have to start from us not seeking that acceptance from outside sources because we have that at home, or we have that in a mentor, or we have that in a older sister figure or an older brother figure. And so while we need to address what is happening now, we also need to be wrapping our minds around the prevention aspect of all of this. And I want to go ahead and get to Summer and talk a little bit about your experience. I wanted you to come on the panel because you have the specific experience of being a lived experience expert as well as a direct service provider. And I definitely relate to that. It can be overwhelming. It can be very stressful, as a lot of us on this panel do some type of direct service. But I want to touch on and give the audience a little bit of insight on just like kind of what that's like, and that dynamic of like having to heal yourself every day while you're trying to simultaneously help others and empower others to heal, because that's how you heal, right, is empowerment. It's not about like, let's take certain verbiage out of our vocabulary. Like, we don't save people, we don't rescue people. Yes, there are circumstances where children have to physically be extracted from a situation, but as far as terminology and verbiage matters, because we are saying like, hey, let's go rescue all these people. that is already diminishing language, right? Like, I already don't feel empowered by the fact that you feel like you are coming to rescue me. So my empowerment aspect, I'm already diminished self-esteem wise, because I've been being sold for sex. I've been being exploited. I've been being told that I'm worthless. I'm this, I'm that. I think already that I'm this low level bottom feeder because society looks at me as a prostitute, and society doesn't value prostitutes or those being prostituted. So when somebody then swoops in and is like, yeah, I'm here to save you. And you're like, okay, so I can only live a fulfilled life if somebody else comes in to pull me out of something else, right? And so first I want to say thank you for all the work you do, because you're amazing. Everybody's amazing, but you're amazing. You know, I think that. But what, on a basis level, like on a very elementary level, what is the biggest misconception on this on sex trafficking, urban domestic sex trafficking to be specific, only because I know we share that kind of background. So when I say urban domestic sex trafficking, guys, I'm talking about like the sex trafficking or pimp and prostitution culture that you would see in like hip hop, or what they portray to us on like that you're going to see on social media, as far as like strip clubs and like that kind of portrayal of that urban culture. So with urban domestic sex trafficking, what in your experience is the biggest misconception on it as a whole?
Okay, so I want to thank you all, every single person that has spoken today. You're absolutely amazing. Thank you for sharing your stories. A couple things I want to touch on, and it will kind of lead in what you're talking about. First of all, we have to get our language right. Do not say rescue. Please stop saying rescue, because that, first of all, how are you rescuing somebody that doesn't even know they're a victim? Let's just start there, okay? And plus, if we're going to talk about things and we're going to talk about real life, like, I didn't even know I was a human trafficking victim until I was sitting in a conference that somebody asked me to come set a table up, because I have a business that helps women, eventually will be able to employ women to make soap. And so I was sitting there and I was watching all the checklists, and I was just like, wait a minute, like, so, okay, there is that. A lot of victims don't even realize they're victims. And the word rescue, it just really goes through my soul, because we're not rescuing anybody. We're helping them escape. We're helping them, we have a thing in our organization, and we're saying we're doing life, right? Because as Jamie expressed, I am only 5 years out of the life. 5 years ago, I was prostituting and stripping myself. I had stopped being trafficked when I was 29 years old. And so, and I heard a couple of times, like, about choices, like, really, is it a choice? Because I believe something along those lines may have happened way before trafficking or stripping or anything came into apply. And so definitely want to kind of, I think we have to be careful with our language. You got to love people where they're at. And something that I've picked up on, just about everybody that has spoken is, either, there were people there that could have helped, or just didn't know how to help. And you have to understand, the trauma from a survivor is very real. And as I'm in my experience of healing and dealing with escapes and dealing with housing and dealing with, law enforcement and things like that, to be able to help people, which I also seen somewhere somebody said call 911. That's not always going to help, because I've been raped by 3 cops. So while I was being trafficked. So 911, me personally, like right now I'm in Louisville, Kentucky. We're doing a lot of social justice things that are going on right now. And what we're trying to get people to understand is, being able to have advocates go out and be able to, that way they can help the victims. Because just someone's uniform could actually completely trigger them to a point, and it still does me to a point, and so I definitely want to touch on that. I'm sorry, I'm going to kind of touch on a couple things because I was taking notes, but yeah, our language, we need to get better. And healing is going to be different for everybody, you know what I mean? Like, some people may just need you to shut your mouth and listen. Like, some people may need to know that you're going to follow through on what you say. Some people are going to need housing. Some people are, we do housing, but we also have, I don't know, a couple hundred women that we offer service to that don't live in our residential, because sustaining them to where they've gotten out of life and they're, maybe they need groceries. Maybe it's something as simple as diapers. Maybe it's something as simple as, you know what I mean, like a gas card, or, we give gift cards to the women that we serve, because, let them go, empowering them, right? That's what it's all about, empowering the not victims anymore, but the survivors turning into warriors, right? And so, giving them a gift card and saying, here, you might need some groceries. That way you can go buy the stuff that you need. So I'm not picking the things out because of the control aspect of being trafficked, because really that's what trafficking all is. It's about power and control, right? And so being in the middle of everything and being 5 years out of the life, just celebrating 5 years into ministry, it's a very difficult thing. And being in the urban lane of things, it's definitely different. We have, we just did a big thing here in Kentucky, down in Frankfurt, and my focal point was talking about Black and brown children, and Native American children that no one wants to ever talk about, because when they think of trafficking, they think of the blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl, which, granted, yes, that happens. Trafficking happens in every aspect. But I think that we need to start having more conversations about the people this is actually affecting, which is in all aspects. We need to have people at the table that everybody can, that somebody can recognize. Like, I've got pink hair and tons of tattoos, and people are always like, you're gonna change your look. No, I'm not gonna change my look, because the women that I serve, it helps them. I get cracked on a lot of, because my mouth is pretty shitty. But it's real life, and so being, my experience coming from tons of childhood abuse, tons of abuse and sexual assault, and being a runaway. That's something that, I don't think we've talked about a whole lot too. People need to take runaways a little bit more serious, because as we know, 1 in 3 runaways can, and I don't like statistics either, because as you say, as the young, my beautiful sister said earlier, as soon as you let a statistic out your mouth, that's statistic change, right? And so something we need to think about is that, runaways. And we've talked a lot about dysfunctional homes, but sometimes it's not even dysfunctional homes that get you into trafficking. Mm-hmm. So that's something else that I want people to understand, because if we have this mind frame that it only happens in dysfunctional families, then we're not going to think about the young lady's case that I'm working in. I don't mention names, but somebody, everybody has phones. And either people don't want to give their kids phones, or because they don't want to have the conversations to teach their children on how to be protective, or they give them the phones and then they don't monitor them at all. And somebody can make a profile as a 16, 17-year-old kid, and they build that relationship, which is, we know, is grooming. And this young lady thinks that she's told her family, I'm going to, buy a phone or whatever, And so the next thing you know, boom, she's gone. And so now, I think that, trafficking is a very complicated situation, and it comes in so many different forms. As we know, it comes in, especially with COVID going on right now, I see a lot of familial trafficking happening. And like in our state, Kentucky is #1 in child abuse. And so when things like that, if there's a child abuse kind of problem, even though I said it doesn't come all from dysfunctional families, there's probably something that can lead into that. To kind of go back to what you were at the original question, and I apologize, there was just some things I was like, I got to get the language, we got to get the language right, because it's important to the people that we serve. We have to remember that. And I do agree that, yes, in the urban area, it can happen, a lot through entertainment. I mean, a lot through, music and all that kind of stuff. In my situation, I was kidnapped when I was younger, got brutally gang raped, multiple, rapes before I was even trafficked, which led me into the strip club, which for me was empowerment, because I was like, hey, and this is what I thought in my mind, like, hey, I'll just get them before they get me type thing, and then I met my boyfriend, I say that with air quotes, and he did the Romeo trafficking with me, and I stayed in it for a very long time. I also experienced gorilla pimps, and so it's it's pretty crazy. I think we need to make space, for like when I tell the women, I run a home, and we say we have a sisterhood. Again, it's all about wording, right? So people feel more comfortable if you love them where they're at. I'm very disappointed, as I am a street minister, on how the church has handled the LGBTQ plus community, how they've handled a lot of things, because I believe that, as believers, you're supposed to love people where they're at. And if you're leaving that whole community out because of what you think, I think that's just ridiculous to me. Actually was able to honor a march yesterday with our trans community here in Louisville, because we're doing a lot of protesting. So I just really want people to start, we say love people where they're at, but like, you really have to love people where they're at, and you have to understand that trauma, one day somebody can be perfectly fine, and the next day their trauma, a smell, somebody could walk by and a smell could trigger them. Or even in this, I shout out to all my sister survivors and brothers that after this conversation, it might be a rough night because they've opened themselves up to listen to things. But we have to understand, whether you have a drop-in center, whether you're doing educational, whether you're doing street ministry, you're running a house, we have to love people where they're at, and give these victims, which are survivors, once at least, that's what I call the girls that come into our program. We tell them, we don't say, hey, this is a program. We say, come on home, because a lot of us, make our own families up, and so I really want us to get better at our language and loving people for who they are, and understanding that everybody's healing is going to be different. Everybody's experience is different. My entry into the porn industry was a little bit different than other people's, because it was done, through a strip club thing, and we had these feature things we would sell, and we were manipulated to, hey, you'll sell these and you'll get more dances, and next thing you know, we had a whole porn video out, and that's kind of got me leading into that, which was not, so I look back now and was not a choice, you know what I mean? It was done through a lot of manipulation, a lot of grooming. And not only that, like, we have to understand that victims have a lot of trust issues. I mean, come on, especially if you've been through a lot of trauma and maybe family was involved in it, like, of course you're going to have trust issues, so again, just really loving people where they're at. And I would say for everybody to get trauma informed, to understand what trauma is, because again, trauma is going to be different all the way across the board. What was the question again? I guess I kind of got off on a
covered. It was mostly about misconceptions, and just, I think that
well, and the misconception for the urban area is, for me, people always think, like, and not saying, I always say you're looking for the guy that's got the baggy pants and, standing on the corner. And in some sense that might be true, but not near one of my pimps ever looked like that. You know what I mean? My pimps wore suits. My pimps went to church with you all. My pimps went to golf outings. My pimps hung out with your all's husbands, but yet was coming in the urban community, exploiting the women that, were vulnerable. You know what I mean? So we have a lot of, and then we have these misconceptions that, and shout out to my brothers that have spoke today, because, we have made it in a society where it's shameful, God forbid, if a man has to speak up on something, and saying that they've been a victim of something. God forbid if a man cries or a man's been raped. I mean, where do we give them the space to, I think as women, we can sit there and we'll say, it's a woman, and we can relate to that because it's a woman. But yes, men get trafficked, and yes, it's bad, and so we need to have more space so men can come up and say, hey, this has happened to me, because I would probably guarantee you that the numbers are right on track with each other, and so there's a lot of misconceptions. I mean, look what happened, and I'm not going to get into a big thing about it, but I mean, look how easily it was for everybody to jump on the Wayfair thing. You know what I mean? Like, and here survivors, multiple survivors will sit there and say, this is not going on, this is not going on. But only time people want to listen to us is when we're telling our gory stories. Like, we shouldn't have to keep telling our gory stories for you to get it. Like, we got to get to a point where we're listening to survivors and we're understanding. And like, I don't have to jump through hoops to prove to you, yeah, I've been buried alive. I've had guns in every orifice of my body, but I shouldn't have to tell you that time and time and time again for you to understand where I'm coming from. You don't even have to have, you know, anybody that's around me. I mean, my healing process is very open. You can even follow me on Facebook. Like, I'm very, very open on a lot of things. And some days you're going to get the nice, sweet Summer loves, you know, Jesus loves you and everything. And other days I'm going to tell you, get the fuck over yourself and give me some space. You know what I mean? Like, so healing, you know, to everybody that's in healing, understand that healing it's going to be a lifelong thing. You're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days, you're going to have, you know what I mean? Like, and everybody's healing's different. What works for you might not work for me, and what works for me might work for you. But all this, you know, picking shit apart and all that, that's ridiculous. And I really wish we could get to a space that, you know, we listen to survivors and we hear what we're saying without us having to go into our gory details. Because, by the way, that's exploitation, and that's kind of the same thing that our pimps did to us. I mean, I'm just saying, to an extent, it could be. So.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's so many, like, you know, and like I said earlier, we have been here for almost 3 hours and we still have only been able to scratch the surface of a couple of questions, which which shows the dynamics that go into issues like exploitation. I do think that, you know, I think that from my perspective as a service provider, as well as somebody with lived experience, and also somebody who tends to speak to things that are not very popular amongst not only the survivor community, but amongst society as a whole, I firmly believe that there are very many deeply rooted similarities between those that are doing the exploiting as well as those that are exploited.
Well, sorry, Jamie, not to cut you off, but, you know, and I think that's something in the survivor community that we have to understand. You know, we talk about, are we going to get to the root of this? And so I'll be the person everybody can be pissed off at. That's fine. I don't care. We talk about, you know, the demand aspect. We talk about the victim aspect. And we can even talk about pimps in an aspect when they're harming people. But, like, we also have to understand all the aspects of it and what got them to doing what they were doing. What did each and every single person go through to get to where they're at? You know what I mean? So, like, you know, and I get it. I understand victims want to, or not victims, but survivors, you know, it's like, hey, we want our own space. I get that. I get that 100%. But if we don't understand why the buyers are doing what they're doing, if we don't understand what the pimp went through for him to even become to that point, because as you know, one of the speakers said, majority of men, you know, they're your protectors, right? Like, think about when you're looking at a baby, the baby has love in them. The baby looks at you. They don't care what color you are. They don't care how much money you got. None of that. They just look at you with these big, pretty eyes, and it's this love. So over time, things happen to each and every single individual. And until we can really gut wrench that conversation, like, we're never going to get nowhere on track. You know, I've seen, you know, we have brothers that have came out of the life and shared their stories on what got them there, and seeing them completely shamed, you know. And I just think that we have to understand all aspects of it. And we definitely need to start getting on the demand aspect more, because me personally, you know, domestic violence and human trafficking are a lot alike. They're a lot of the same tactics and everything. The only difference in some cases, not all, but some cases, is the buyer. You know, you put the buyer in play and that domestic violence turns into human trafficking, you know, and not in all situations, but in some situations.
Can I speak to what you were just talking about? So you were talking about getting to, like, the root cause of the buyers, right? Of the buyers, right, and even our traffickers. And so I'll just share. So from my dad, what I found out later in life, because I actually took care of him the last 9 months of his life. And He was raped at 13.
Exactly.
And I remember I shared with you, you're fine. I shared with you earlier that I came from a Greek Orthodox and Italian, some Greek, right? My grandfather, my dad's father, is this hierarchy, or was, in the Greek Orthodox Church throughout the world. And so my dad was always in white and a sissy. And at 13 years old in Tarpon Springs, which is a little Greek community not too far from where I live, at 13 years old, another boy came up to him, showed him a porn magazine. Now, back then, it was like looking at Sears catalog, okay? That's how little there was.
Right.
My dad said immediately, I loved it. Went up to the guy's apartment, was gang raped. And he said, and from there, I learned sex, especially porn, was all about power and control.
100%. It's that, you know, and when that Pandora box has been opened up, that, you know what I mean? Like, it's, we have to understand all aspects of it if we're really going to get in it. And I understand that not all survivors can take that fight on. I get that. Not all victims can take, that's a hard fight, because you have to really ingest some things. You really have to be like, okay, let me think outside myself. Like, why did this person, you know, do this to me, and what happened to them? And, you know what I mean? And so it's your system. Somebody's
wow.
Somebody's not
so
muted.
There.
Somebody's not muted.
Yeah.
Someone's
There
not muted.
There they are.
Thank you. So if we're really gonna, you know, and this, and you know, Jamie, I love that you put this together, and I think we should definitely have part 2, part 3. But you know, like we got to get our language right. We got to get to where we understand each victim is going to be completely different. You know what I mean? Like I've seen from every spectrum that you can possibly think of. And when you're doing, especially when you're doing housing and then you're doing street outreach on top of it, you know, and the fact that, you know, when we say, you know, love people where they're at, but yet then we'll turn around and tear them apart because maybe their experience was a little bit different than ours. In the survivor community alone, we got to get the fuck over ourselves on that. Like, seriously. And I'm sorry, you guys, but like, this is just what it is. You know,
I agree. Amen. Oh yeah.
You know, and that also takes some healing, because I understand in healing that we go through our, you know, healing, you get, you feel bad, and, you know, you feel shameful, and then you get pissed off, and I get all that, but like, you have to get, and, you know, and again, I'm 5 years out of the life. I don't, you know, I have still a lot of shit I'm working through, you know what I mean? But, you know, I have a relationship with God, and he's helped me do my thing. And I know that's not for everybody, and I don't force shit down anybody's throat. We are a faith-based organization, and I'll be damned if we're not gonna, I had somebody one day say to me, like, are you gonna help, you know, all the girls in your house are Christian. I was like, good. Like, that's not what this is about. Like, if they get a relationship, awesome, but that's not what this is about. This is meeting them where they're at. I have lost donors because I'll go to the LGBT. Sorry, y'all, my brain's we're on overload here in Louisville, y'all. We doing like big time protesting and everything, so my brain's a little bit over. But you know, the gay and trans community, you damn right I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go love. Those are my brothers and sisters. You know what I mean? And so we just have to get over this of what it's supposed to look like, because what you think it's supposed to look like is not what the hell it looks like. You know, we'll sit there, and again, like I say, and I'm not gonna stay on the Wayfair or the whatever pizza shit, whatever last of them was. Like, we got real life stuff happening, even in the news. Like, we got a real big trafficking thing going on, pedophile ring and everybody's talking about everything else except what it is. And then if victims or survivors say, hey, this person has exploited me, this person harmed me, and just because this person's in a powerful position, you want to sit there and go, no, you don't know what you're talking about. The hell? Then why are we going to keep giving survivors voices if we're not going to listen to them? Like, if that's the case, then everybody should just pack their shit and go home. Because what's the point? Yes, I'm very real.
You and
sorry.
I are from like the same blood or something. Oh my God. I gave that whole,
I don't, you know, and that's
sermon the other day. It was like,
you know, and I do it all the time. It's like, if we're not, and you have to understand that everybody, you know what I mean? Like, everybody's going through shit. Everybody's trauma is different. And that's one thing that just hurts me so bad, is when I'll see, even in the survivor community, each other will tear each other apart just because my shit don't match with yours, or I don't look the way you think I should, or I don't talk People say, I mean, hell, I was just at the United Nations. Every person on here has done badass shit in this movement. But, I'm not going to be put in somebody else's box just because, I can't listen to it because she's too true. She's too raw. She's too real. But you can listen to it when I'm telling you I've been buried alive. You can listen to it when I'm telling you there ain't much different between a preacher and a pimp. You can listen to it then, but because it's comfortable for you. This is an uncomfortable situation. And so I am going to be the one that's going to make you uncomfortable. And if you're not uncomfortable, then you're not fucking learning.
Eric, what did you want to say?
I mean, I 100% agree everything that my sister Summer over here is saying. I think the other misconception too that we need to is to have human trafficking, the culture of human trafficking understood. I know with a lot of my work out here in Indiana, with a lot of things I got my hands into, that is the biggest barrier because they don't understand the culture of human trafficking. They find it way easier to dehumanize us, and not only that, but keep us as the lower part of society. Until we can get society to acknowledge human trafficking as a culture with its own values, norms, and language, that we're just, again, we're only hyper-focusing on 1% of the trafficking issue. I fully believe too, a trafficker doesn't wake up saying, hey, I want to be a trafficker. No,
right.
That's a condition of your environment. Just like I was after my trauma, I became a condition of my environment. And until we have all voices at the table, I humbly agree, we're just spinning around in circles. We're never going to get anywhere to real solutions until we start looking at all aspects of the culture of human trafficking.
Can I say
something? Go ahead.
Sarah has something to say.
I think everything that you're saying is incredible. Summer, is it?
Yes.
And Eric too. I truly believe that if you're wanting to get into the system of it, you have to hit them where it hurts, which is pornography. Everybody's watching pornography. Everybody's involved in pornography. Trafficking is like the prostitution and the trafficking that no one wants to look at. I can't tell you how many people I've spoken to that are like, oh, people in porn, tons of those people were manipulated. They did not consent, but because it looks like entertainment and it looks like something that everybody is doing, then you have children that are involved watching these kinds of things, teenagers that are involved watching these kinds of things, 50-year-old men that are, or 50, 60, whatever, men and women that are using the pornography is like, I believe that it is a slowly brewing terrorism, not only on the brain, but on people in general. It is 88% violence and normalization of it. And when you use orgasmic conditioning, you are training the brain to motivate towards more of it. Way back when, then they were doing aversion therapies to get men out of being homosexual. They were using orgasmic conditioning to get them to be attracted to the opposite sex. It didn't work, but they started to discover that the orgasmic conditioning was something that was working more with like offender behaviors, or in the pornography industry, orgasmic conditioning. Basically, whatever they're watching, whatever they're doing, the brain is kind of like, oh, so this makes you happy. And so they literally believe that what they're watching and what they're doing is making them happy. And because of this, they can get withdrawals as if you would from drugs, like the same with cocaine, how pornography affects the brain the same way that cocaine does. And the biggest way you're gonna make like the most impact is to talk about something that everybody is talking about, which is pornography. Because if they won't talk about trafficking, fucking fine. They don't want to talk about stuff. People want to keep things really hidden. Get them talking about pornography, snare them in that trap, and bring trafficking to the forefront in the middle of it.
Can I interject real quick? Jamie, you got something to say?
Yeah, well, okay, so we need to wrap up this conversation because we're getting into our 3 o'clock. Well, for me, it's a 3 o'clock mark. That's 3 hours. Whoever wants to stay on, and any of the panelists who want to stay on, you're more than welcome to. I just want to add in, well, we do talk about these these solutions, like when we're talking about all these solutions, we're talking about pornography, we're talking about demand, we're talking about entertainment, we're talking about family trafficking, we're talking about boyfriend pimping, we're talking about foster system, we're talking about all of these things. But still, well, we have to identify that what we're talking about and our solutions that we're talking about are very much still in a reactive and responsive state. And so I am very big on reminding all of us, and I wouldn't feel I did my due diligence if I didn't remind us all, that the core of all of those things is humanity, and the core of all of those things is recognizing the next person not as a survivor of trafficking, not as a pimp, not as a gang member, not as somebody formerly incarcerated, not as a ex-porn star, not as a current porn star, not as a sex worker, not all of those labels. Like, we have to, if we're going to get anywhere, we cannot get to any of the things that any of us are talking about solution-wise if we do not come to terms with the fact that we, one, are all part of the problem, survivors included, all the panelists, all of the people watching. We all in some way have a direct link, whether it just be our limited biases, prejudgmental biases, whether it be our whatever. However, we are all brought up and bred in a certain way. We all grew up in different households. We all grew up with different family dynamics. We all have a place in being a part of this problem. But with being that, that's a hard pill for us to swallow, because nobody wants to be a part of exploitation. Nobody wants to be a reason that sex trafficking is thriving. Nobody wants to be a reason that any of this is happening. But when we can come to the fact and digest that pill that we are, that's when we can get over that hump and we can figure out, okay, I have this part in the problem. Now this is my role in the solution. And the commonality, if we want to make a list of solutions, that can go on forever. But the basis of those solutions is putting humanity back into our everyday culture, our everyday life, because what drives pornography is greed and sexual addiction and fetishes and things that are bred into us. And so if in order to address that, we have to first address the fact of how we have allowed our minds to normalize the conception of all of the things that are helping this industry thrive. And this industry, human trafficking, is the symptom of a much deeper cancer. So human trafficking is in the same category as homelessness and addiction and trauma and abuse and all of these things, incarceration, mass incarceration. These are all symptoms of a cancer of lack of humanity. And with lack of humanity comes greed, and comes hate, and comes evil, and comes all of these deep issues that are thriving, helping all of these things thrive. And so I just encourage all of us to dig beyond trying to rattle our brains for the solution after humanity, and first go back to our cores, our roots. And I believe it was Connie that addressed, like, we have to be able to address, who are we at our core, and how am I communicating with people on an everyday basis to make them feel judged, make them feel biased, like I have a bias against them, make them feel like they're not accepted, even if it's just because I'm having a bad day. That bad day and how you interact with that person could be the turning point of, like, well, I don't matter because that person acted like I didn't matter in our conversation. So being mindful of how we're interacting, how we're communicating, is the core, and it is important. And then we can figure out how to get to these solutions, because as you can see, there is a plethora of ways that we need to get involved, we need to change, but we can't do that until we are figuring out what our role is. And our role is vital and it is important. And when the great thing about healing human trafficking is, once we figure out how to heal it through humanity, we are also going to see that that solution is the same solution for a lot of the other issues that exist within our community, that hurt us and harm us. And we did not get to a lot of material. And I know this, and I am so appreciative of everybody just staying on and being able to talk about these things. I am going to send out a list of resources that all of the panelists have suggested for ways that you can get involved. If you want to financially donate, that's great. Please, 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 not to say that ally organizations are not important, but please, while we are thinking about funding and donating financially, can we please think about those survivor-led organizations, boots to the ground organizations that are not qualified for funding, like the Trump administration, whatever got distributed. We don't necessarily qualify for a lot of those funding sources. And so a lot of us are really struggling with not only trying to maintain our own healing, but also trying to have that interaction with others trying to heal. And oftentimes that isn't in itself is a way to help exploitation continue to thrive, is by us. There's very limited amounts of survivor leaders, right? Very limited amount of people with lived experience that are able to have the capacity mentally and emotionally to do the work that needs to be done. And so a huge way to continue this cycle of exploitation is to wear me out, right? Burn me out, because I have this lived experience. I'm just using myself as an example. I have this lived experience that I know is the key to opening up some healing for a huge amount of other people. But the enemy for me is God and the enemy and spiritual warfare. The way to stop the healing in so many other people who might only heal through me sharing my story is to break me down and to put me in a place where I'm burnt out so I can no longer do this work. And so please think about, you're supporting, whatever it is that got you interested, whether it's Pizzagate, Wayfair, whether it's you have lived experience yourself, whether this is something that just came across the table and you're interested in, please think about supporting those who are doing boots to the ground work that necessarily aren't qualified for these big streams of funding. And even if it's not monetary support, see how you can get involved, see how you can volunteer, see how you can collect outreach items, see how you can just be there as a support system for that individual to let them know, like, hey, the work you're doing is important. I appreciate you. I love you, and continue to do it, and just be that support system. I could go on for days and days and days, as I'm sure we all can. I want to open the floor. I know we have questions. What I'm going to do is save this chat over here. I'm pushing save chat right now. I'm going to save it. I'm going to post it into our chat amongst the expert panel. We will try to individually maybe address these questions, maybe through some live videos on Facebook, something. We'll figure something out. We're all pretty creative. We can figure out a way to get this to where you all feel validated and feel like your questions were heard. I will be sending out the bios of all of us with all of our emails and photos, and I will also send out the resource list. I am going to plug myself for just a second because I want to be able to pay the panelists more than what I'm going to be able to pay. So if anybody is interested in supporting financially this panel, www.sistersofthestreets.org. There's a donate button on the top. If you'd like to even just donate $5 that I can distribute evenly amongst the panelists for their time and their expertise and their sharing today, that would be amazing. If you would like to donate to any of the other organizations that our panelists run, I do have those on our list. And so you're welcome to donate there, get involved. Other than that, panelists, do you guys have any burning, I hate this term, but like burning desires? Sounds so weird.
Can I back up just what you're saying right now, Jamie? Please, you guys, please, you guys, we would love, especially survivor-led organizations. Please support them, because I know a lot of people, because I don't know about a lot of you guys, but I know tons of people have been tagging me on what Trump's doing and all the money he's giving out. Well, I'm not qualified. You know what I mean? A lot of grassroots organizations that are doing the boots on the ground 365 days a year, we're not qualified for something. And then being a faith-based organization, I don't qualify for all the grants that are out there, because I will serve the LGBTQ community. I will serve anybody that needs help. You know what I mean? So like, you know, we do, you know, emergency housing. We do all kinds of different things. You can, you know, look me up on Facebook, but I definitely, and not to jump in on that plug, but please, and even if it's not mine, if you know, some survivor-led organization that's by you, you know, or around you, get involved and get trained and get, you know, get and help, you know what I mean? Because, you know, we could sit here and, you know, think about this. the more awareness we do, right, the more people wake up, right, and realize what's going on. That means that the services that are out there for the victims / survivors / warriors, because even survivor leaders sometimes need help, the more awareness we bring to this, the more resources that we need. And so, please, you guys, start pouring into your survivor-led organizations. And if you are a non-survivor-led organization, I am going to call you and tell you right now, anybody that's listening, have a survivor on your board. Have a survivor as your advisory. Have survivor, like how are, something that I struggle a lot with as a survivor is with not, and I partner with some amazing non-survivor organizations. Let me just say that real quick. But something that I struggle with a lot, it's like, oh, we can come help you as a victim, but then once you get empowered and you find your strength and you turn all your pain into becoming a warrior, and you're out here doing the work because you know what people have been through, and you know to some extent, because everybody's different, everybody's thing's different. But it's like, then it's like, you constantly, you'll see the big, huge, known, non-survivor organizations that don't have not one survivor in a power position, get all the funding. Like, start empowering your survivor-led organizations, because if you can help them as a victim, but you can't help them when they're a survivor leader, then you don't need to be helping. Sorry.
Thank you.
I think the one thing I'd like to say, I always say it at the end of all my presentations or whatever I do, believe survivors. No matter how crazy the story may be, no matter how much you think it may not be untrue, and sometimes because of the complex trauma, the story doesn't sound the same, but at the end of the day, it did happen. So believe survivors no matter what.
And in going with the believing survivors, trusting survivors, expert knowledge of what's going on right now, and I didn't want to open this can of worms, but I think we need to, with everything that is going on right now, with the awareness around human trafficking, people, it's become a political ploy. It has become incredibly sensationalized. It's so we'll take that believe survivors further than just believing them about their story. When we say things are harmful, when we say don't do that, when we say that organization is harmful, not legitimate, or is corrupt or whatever, we need to be believed, because our only agenda or intention in doing this work, we have everything to lose by sharing our stories, by showing our face, by being the voices. And our only agendas is to make sure that the vulnerable and those who have been victimized get the services and the help that they need. So we're not trying to, some are, but we're not trying to control or be like seeking attention through our work and through being on the platforms that we're on. We just know how harmful disinformation can be. We know what trafficking is at the root and what it is not. And in closing, before I step off, I just want to say, in the conversations around human trafficking right now that is going on with these 500,000 kids are being rescued from underground tunnels by President Trump. That's like, scratching a chalkboard to me. Like, I cannot even handle the conversations that I'm hearing right now. You guys have just been informed and empowered with lots of really good information. So those doors are going to open to you to share what you've just learned. Take those opportunities to point people in the direction of a survivor-led organization. Point people to the root issues and dispel the disinformation. Like, you want to know how you can help? That's a huge way that you can help, is to start minimizing the sensationalism and the disinformation, right? By using the information that you've just been provided. Because I really think, like, I am a believer, and I do believe in spiritual warfare and darkness versus light. I fully believe in that. And I think that the darkness, the evil, Satan, if you want to call him that, has an agenda. We've been making such incredible progress in the fight against human trafficking that now it's like he is diverting people's attention and the focus off of, right? We were starting to make progress in addressing demand, and now people are starting to be conditioned to think it's only the elite, you know, and it's only the untouchables that are victimizing and doing harmful things to children, when that is just not the truth. So you guys become advocates, you guys become frontline warriors on social media, pointing to areas where now you're informed. It's going to take all of us, you know, and so I appreciate you guys. I'm going to hop off of here. I appreciate every single panelist and everyone that took the time to be involved today. I really, really do appreciate it. And I think that there was some incredible information shared today that's going to create change.
Thanks, Wendy.
Bye, guys.
As everybody, I know there was some people who initially, like, a big reason why they wanted to hop on was so that we could address the things like Pizzagate and Wayfair and things like that. And I honestly, I hope that, you know, if we need to expand this conversation on a personal level, like, I'm more than willing, I can't speak for anybody else, to engage in those conversations. What I will say really quickly is that, like everybody else has already said, why these things are hard, I can't 100% say that what is in the media isn't happening, because just because that's not my experience, I can't be like, well, I'm a survivor, so what I say goes. That's not at all what it is. Like everybody has mentioned and said, is that yes, maybe something similar to this is a fact or is going on, and hopefully, you know, it is a conspiracy. But what we are saying is that, we are so quick to push the share button on things and articles like that and become human trafficking experts overnight because we think we read an article or we think that this catches our eye. Well, we are so quick to share that. It's like, that's a possibility of something that could be factual, could be happening, could have some dubs thrown on it or whatever. But why are we so quick to listen to that when we have hundreds, if not thousands, of people with experience that are openly sharing their experience with that we know is happening? So let's focus on that first. And then when we figure out how to navigate that and navigate how to work through those things and the people that are stepping up to share their lived experience, then maybe that can trickle into understanding if those things like Pizzagate and Wayfair do exist, then we can figure out how to tackle those on a monumental and like larger scale level. So that's not to dismiss, to say that God forbid those things are happening. It's to say that let's focus on what we know is happening versus what may be happening. And why it is harmful is because, in my opinion, why it is harmful is because, we are looking for people ordering pizzas and really kids are being delivered. We are missing our own children in our own home, showing us signs and factors and red flags that they are being groomed or bred to being trafficked, because we're so focused on sharing that news article that we saw on Facebook, and we want to become a part of the trending bandwagon of what's going on. So we're missing our own children being groomed for exploitation. We're missing our wife dealing with things at work that are grooming for exploitation. We're missing the things that our husband is suffering with, or we're missing our neighbor and the traffic going in and out of our neighbor's home because we're so busy trying to focus on the bandwagon aspect of the sensationalized version of trafficking. Again, that's not to say that those things don't happen. What it is to say is that we can't address this issue on a worldly scale until we figure out how to address it within our own homes, our own communities, our own territory, first and foremost. And so that's kind of my spiel on that. We don't have time for all the panelists to talk about that. Again, we will distribute somehow, figure out somehow to get all of this stuff distributed to you guys. If anything on this panel didn't sit well with you, if you have a different perspective, and I'm speaking to the panelists as well, we all have different experiences, right? We all come from different backgrounds, audience included. If something didn't sit well, if something offended you, first of all, I'm not responsible for what was said unless it was out of my mouth. So I'm just saying, I'm not taking accountability for that, but I will take accountability for the fact that I did put this panel together, and I did do it with the knowledge, knowing that not everybody has the same ideas and ways of expression or same perspectives. And so if something was offensive to you that is just not sitting well with you, please feel free to contact me directly. We can have a discussion about it. I'm all about mediation, restorative, approaches and things like that. And that is to say that not everyone's healing is on the same level. Some people have a perspective. I thoroughly believe that pimps and traffickers need a platform and a space of healing within the anti-trafficking movement. A lot of people don't agree with me, and that's okay, because when I speak about that, it's going to offend somebody because someone's not there yet. Same with the buyer side, same with the systemic side, same with the racial side. Everyone is you can't please everyone, right? And so I say that if anything was offensive and you would like to talk about it, please hit me up, and I will do my best to mediate those feelings with you and work through those with you. Other than that, we are about 20 minutes past the 3 hours mark. So everyone who's hung in there, still like 65 of you guys, 65, 70 of you guys on here, I really appreciate all the conversation on the side. I am going to go through that. Panelists, I appreciate you. You guys know I love you. I rock with you. I support you. You guys are dope. Thank you for being vulnerable, sharing your experiences, and hanging in there. And I believe that we will have a part 2 of this, and we will come back to this conversation. I look forward to emailing all of you. And unless there's any last burning issues or desires to speak on, I will send you guys love and light and blessings and say have a great weekend.
Good night.